Hello, humanoids! This is Ian T. Mello, and welcome to Squared Circle History, the podcast that chooses a promotion, focuses on a specific year, and gives a comprehensive and unbiased look at the best matches, moments, promos, and feuds. You may be familiar with the Squared Circle History video series on YouTube, which has existed for 5 years now, but it has just now become an issue to the mighty WWE. Despite their best efforts to destroy the brand I've worked hard to build, I'll be pivoting from the video series for a bit to focus on this new podcast and hopefully won't ruffle too many feathers over in Stamford, Connecticut. We won't have the screenshots of the actual footage, but if you're a wrestling history buff, I'll still get all of the years in review out there. I encourage you to check out the actual footage of the wrestling events that are being discussed, because, and I cannot stress this enough, the intent of this podcast is to make new fans of the product of the yesteryear. I'm a lifelong wrestling fan, and I love all of the history that there is of televised professional wrestling. So let's travel through wrestling history together here on Squared Circle History. Today we are going to focus on World Championship Wrestling in 1989, and what a year it was. This was the first full year that the promotion was owned by Ted Turner, with WCW still governed by the rules of the NWA. To put you right in the time frame, let's go through what was happening in pop culture during the year of 1989. At the box office, Batmania was running wild, with Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson starring in Tim Burton's epic film, Batman. Also in the theater were memorable films such as Field of Dreams, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, Little Monsters, Dead Poets Society, When Harry Met Sally, Major League, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, Roadhouse, Drugstore Cowboy, Born on the 4th of July, Driving Miss Daisy, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Back to the Future 2, Ghostbusters 2, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Lethal Weapon 2, Uncle Buck, The Burbs, UHF, Turner and Hooch, Look Who's Talking, Harlem Nights, and the first WWF film, No Holds Barred, starring Hulk Hogan. Influential Seattle rockers Nirvana, fronted by the iconic Kurt Cobain, released their debut album, Bleach. Also in record stores was Doolittle by the Pixies, Paul's Boutique by the Beastie Boys, Full Moon Fever by Tom Petty, The End of Innocence by Don Henley, Louder Than Love by Soundgarden, Pretty Hate Machine by Nine Inch Nails, 3 Feet High and Rising by De La Soul, The Real Thing by Faith No More, Pump by Aerosmith, Dr. Feelgood by Motley Crue, Mother's Milk by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Cosmic Thing by the B-52s, The Raw and the Cooked by Fine Young Cannibals, Trash by Alice Cooper, Skid Row by Skid Row, Flowers in the Dirt by Paul McCartney, Sonic Temple by The Cult, Disintegration by The Cure, The Stone Roses by The Stone Roses, Like a Prayer by Madonna, Oh Mercy by Bob Dylan, and Steel Wheels by the Rolling Stones. On television, we saw the debuts of memorable shows such as Seinfeld, The Simpsons, Saved by the Bell, Family Matters, Quantum Leap, Cops, Doogie Howser, Dragon Ball Z, American Gladiators, Coach, Beetlejuice the Animated Series, Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers, Eureka's Castle, and the Super Mario Bros. Super Show starring Captain Lou Albano as Super Mario. The Mega Powers exploded in the WWF, but all this pales in comparison to what was happening in WCW. It was a new era for the promotion, featuring plenty of growing pains, but also producing arguably the greatest trilogy of wrestling matches in history. Join us on this trip as we journey back to WCW in 1989. Our journey begins on the January 14th episode of World Championship Wrestling. Barry Windham defended the United States Championship against Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert. With Gilbert showing promise, the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, joined J.J. Dillon at ringside to watch the match. It was a hard-fought battle, ending with Flair attacking Gilbert from behind to cause a disqualification. The Horseman handed a brutal beatdown to Gilbert, leaving him battered and beaten. After winning an enhancement match, the returning Michael P.S. Hayes joined Jim Ross for an interview. Joining them was Hayes' new tag team partner, the Junkyard Dog. Hayes said, "Heaven don't want us, and hell's afraid we'll take over." He then cut a promo on the Varsity Club, stating he and the Dog's intentions of going after the United States Tag Team titles. Jim Ross interviewed J.J. Dillon, United States Champion Barry Windham, and the World Heavyweight Champion Nature Boy Ric Flair. They talked about the beatdown on Eddie Gilbert, showing no remorse. Gilbert interrupted, saying he found a partner to face Flair and Windham the following week. The Horsemen weren't worried, with Dillon accepting the challenge. Flair said, "You and your partner won't walk out of the ring. Bet on it." Missy Hyatt interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair, asking him if he cheated in his match against Lex Luger at Starrcade. Flair said that in the heat of the battle, he did whatever it took to hang on to his title. He said that this would be the last shot Luger would have at the World Heavyweight Championship for as long as he's champion. Rick Steiner defended the World Television Championship against Mike Rotunda. Kevin Sullivan interfered, ambushing Steiner behind the referee's back to give Rotunda an advantage. Even so, Dr. Death Steve Williams attacked Steiner to cause a disqualification. Rotunda hoisted Steiner up for a pile driver, with Sullivan and Williams leaping off the top rope to spike Steiner head first onto the mat. The Junkyard Dog and Michael P.S. Hayes made the save, with the Varsity Club retreating. The January 21st edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Eddie Gilbert introduce his mystery partner, the returning Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. They faced the World Heavyweight Champion Nature Boy Ric Flair and the United States Champion Barry Windham. Steamboat impressed, ultimately nailing Flair with a high cross body and scoring a pinfall victory. Tony Schiavone and Jim Ross interviewed Steamboat and Gilbert, with the Dragon saying he was on a quest to become the World Heavyweight Champion. An irate Flair interrupted, getting in Steamboat's face and saying, "What are you doing here?" Steamboat said that this was America, a country of equal opportunity. Flair cut a promo as Steamboat left and said, "You're here for my belt, and you're not gonna get it." The January 28th edition of Worldwide Wrestling saw David Crockett interview J.J. Dillon, who announced that Barry and Kendall Windham have reconciled. Dillon introduced Kendall, who he said had seen the light. The January 28th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Tony Schiavone interview Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. The Dragon said that he came back to become the world champion. He brought out his wife Bonnie and his young son, saying he wants to become the world champion to secure his son's future. Steamboat said that this was going to be the year of the Dragon. Jim Ross interviewed J.J. Dillon and his newest client, the natural Butch Reed. Dillon said that if there's one thing he is, it's consistent, and his future is looking bright. Reed won an enhancement match with a flying clothesline off the top rope. Dillon entered the ring following the bout, counting a second pinfall for Reed, who posed over his fallen opponent. Steamboat faced one of the Russian assassins with an irate world champion Ric Flair on commentary. Flair said, "This is wrestling, this is not family entertainment, it's a hard, tough sport, and I'm the best there is." Steamboat was victorious with a high cross body, with Flair confronting him after the bout. Steamboat dove over the top rope onto Flair and pounded on him. Barry Windham raced to the scene to attack Steamboat, with Eddie Gilbert soon joining the fray. A wild brawl erupted, which saw Flair ram Gilbert's face against a steel ring post and then drop a knee onto the back of his head on the concrete floor. Gilbert moaned in pain as Steamboat ran off Flair and Windham. Steamboat returned from the hospital by the end of the broadcast, saying that Gilbert had suffered a broken nose and probably a concussion. He said, "Eddie Gilbert took my bullet." The February 4th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross host the show with his new broadcast partner, Magnum TA. They interviewed Eddie Gilbert, who had 2 black eyes and a taped nose. Gilbert cut a fiery promo on Ric Flair and Barry Windham, saying when he got through with them, they'd be well done. Jim Ross interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, the United States Champion Barry Windham, and manager Hiro Matsuda. It was announced that Matsuda had bought the contracts of both Flair and Windham. Flair said that this new partnership could be the greatest experience of all time. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat competed in a public workout, taking on 3 different competitors, including a young Dustin Rhodes. A furious Ric Flair soon made his way to the broadcast table, gloating about his world championship. Steamboat shook hands with his competitors to end the workout. He then dared Flair to enter the ring, with the 2 brawling. Steamboat ripped off the shirt of Flair, who soon retreated with Hiro Matsuda in tow. Jim Ross interviewed the World Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, and Paul Ellering, with Animal cutting a promo on Kevin Sullivan, who'd recently talked trash about the LOD. Hawk continued, saying, "The only reason that there's no fear in your eyes is 'cause you're dumber than a gas pump, Kevin Sullivan." He hyped their upcoming match at Chi-Town Heat. Sting, the Junkyard Dog, and Michael P.S. Hayes won an enhancement match, joining Jim Ross for an interview afterwards. Hayes said, "I ain't Elvis Presley, and I ain't Frank Sinatra, but if I want to get something done, baby, I do it my way." They talked about their upcoming match against the World 6-Man Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, and Tenryu. The February 11th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Magnum TA interview Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express. Cornette hyped the upcoming six-man tag career versus career match against Paulie Dangerously and the original Midnights. He took out a map and travel guides, saying they'd come in handy for Paulie. Footage aired of a bout that took place earlier that day between the World Six-Man Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, and Paul Ellering against the Varsity Club. Dr. Death Steve Williams clobbered Animal with the wooden interview podium behind the referee's back. The Varsity Club honed in on Animal's arm, eventually tossing Ellering over the top rope to cause a disqualification. Hawk wildly swung a steel chair to send the Varsity Club running away. Jim Ross interviewed Paulie Dangerously and the original Midnights, hyping their upcoming career versus career match against Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express. Dennis Condrey held up a sign that said, February 20th, bye-bye Jim Cornette. Paulie said that he was going to have Cornette's job after the 20th. The Clash of the Champions 5, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, took place on February 15th. NWA World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, made a grand entrance with a bevy of beauties on his arms and Hiro Matsuda in tow. Bob Caudle interviewed the champion in the ring, with Flair calling out Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. The Dragon made his way to the ring, with Flair offering him any one of his women, since he must be bored having the same one every night. Steamboat said that he despises what Flair represents as a man and a champion. Flair said that Steamboat is on the outside looking in. Steamboat said that Flair represents all the evil, materialistic things in the world, while he represents the family union. Flair called Steamboat a loser, telling him to go home and help his wife with the dishes. Steamboat attacked Flair, engaging in a chop fest with him. After striking Matsuda, Steamboat ripped a custom suit off Flair's body. Steamboat leaped off the top rope, nailing Flair with a high cross body. The crowd counted in unison as Steamboat covered Flair for nothing more than bragging rights. Matsuda struck Steamboat from behind, with Flair pounding on him. Steamboat fought back, brawling with Flair into the crowd, with the champion only wearing his underwear. Back in the ring, Steamboat put on Flair's rags and said, "So, Nature Boy, this is what a $1,500 suit feels like." Steamboat tossed the remains of the suit into the crowd. Backstage, Kevin Sullivan locked a gate that blocked the stairwell where Sting, the Junkyard Dog, and Michael P.S. Hayes were scheduled to make their entrance. Thus, the main event now saw the Varsity Club against the Road Warriors and Tenryu. Once the gate backstage was opened, Sting, the Junkyard Dog, and Michael Hayes raced to the ring, resulting in a big brawl with all 9 wrestlers. The February 18th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw the in-ring debut of the newest member of the Varsity Club, Dangerous Dan Spivey. Prior to the bout, Jim Ross interviewed the entire faction, with Kevin Sullivan cutting a chilling promo on the Road Warriors. Jim Ross interviewed the NWA World Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, and Paul Ellering. They talked about their upcoming match with the Varsity Club. Hawk talked trash about Dan Spivey, saying, "You might have been a Georgia Bulldog, but when we get done with you in Chicago, you'll be Bull Squat." Jim Ross interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, the United States Champion Barry Windham, and Hiro Matsuda, who said that he needs to protect the investment of the Yamasaki Corporation and protect the championship belt. Flair hyped his match in a matter of days at the Chi-Town Rumble against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. The Samoan SWAT team, Fatu and Samu, made their debut, winning an enhancement bout in impressive fashion. Jim Ross interviewed Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who hyped his upcoming bout against Nature Boy Ric Flair. Steamboat said this is an all-or-nothing situation for him in Chicago. The Chi-Town Rumble took place on February 20th, live on pay-per-view, featuring Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express against Paulie Dangerously, Randy Rose, and Jack Victory, with the loser forced to leave the NWA. Prior to the bout, Paulie said that Cornette and the Midnights knew Dennis Condrey too well, so he had to throw them off. It didn't pay off, as Stan Lane ended up pinning Randy Rose to score the pinfall victory. This meant that Rose would have to leave the NWA. Rick Steiner defended the World Television Championship against Mike Rotunda, with the match ending in controversy. Steiner locked a sleeper hold in on Rotunda, dropping to the mat. He didn't pay attention to his shoulders, with the referee counting 3 and awarding Rotunda the victory by pinfall. Barry Windham defended the United States Championship against Lex Luger. On commentary, Jim Ross described the confrontation as a titanic battle between former tag team champions. After a physical battle, Windham hit a superplex on Luger, but only got a 2 count. Shortly after, Windham nailed Luger with a belly-to-back suplex, with the referee counting 3. Luger managed to lift his shoulder up, becoming the new United States champion. Following the match, Windham nailed Luger with a pile driver onto the belt. The Road Warriors defended the World Tag Team titles against the United States Tag Team Champions Kevin Sullivan and Dr. Death Steve Williams. With referee Teddy Long distracted, Sullivan clobbered the injured shoulder of Animal with a steel chair. In a wild finish, Williams covered Animal while Hawk covered Sullivan, with referee Teddy Long making the 3 count. Since Hawk pinned the Legal Man, the Road Warriors retained the World Tag Team titles. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair defended the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. The challenger wasted no time, making several pinfall attempts on Flair in the opening minutes of the match. Both men exchanged in a brutal chop fest, which saw Flair retreat to the floor to regroup. Flair took the fight to the floor, leveling Steamboat with knife-edge chops. The champion applied the figure 4 leg lock, with Steamboat battling out of it to engage in a chop exchange with Flair. A high cross body by Flair sent both men tumbling over the top rope, with more chops following, until Flair shoved Steamboat against a ring post. Back in the ring, Flair made multiple frantic pinfall attempts, with Steamboat kicking out every time. Multiple pinfall attempts followed, until Steamboat hit a big chop off the top rope. The Dragon ascended the ropes again, nailing a high cross body, but also knocking out referee Tommy Young in the process. Steamboat went for another high cross body, but crashed to the mat as Flair moved out of the way. Flair went for a figure 4, but Steamboat rolled him up with a small package. Teddy Long raced in, making the 3 count. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat was crowned the new NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Backstage, Bob Caudle interviewed the new World Heavyweight Champion. Members of the locker room sprayed champagne all over Steamboat, with Caudle soaked in the process. Steamboat said that he was going to be a champion for the people. The February 28th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Magnum TA interview Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert. He introduced Missy Hyatt, who said that she was going to stand in his corner and provide extra support. Jim Ross interviewed the debuting Iron Sheik, who bragged about being the youngest Olympian from his home country of Iran. Sheik cut a promo on the new World Heavyweight Champion, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. The March 4th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview the Iron Sheik. He demonstrated his strength, swinging Iranian clubs over his head with ease. As the fans chanted USA, Sheik sang the Iranian national anthem. Paulie Dangerously hosted his own interview segment called The Danger Zone. He was backed by his Secret Service member, Jack Victory. Paulie interviewed the Nature Boy Ric Flair, who is accompanied by Hiro Matsuda. Flair said that in 1 week, he planned to wrestle and make a statement to the wrestling world. A pre-taped interview aired with the World Heavyweight Champion, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. He said that while he and Ric Flair are different, they both share a mutual respect for the business. Steamboat said that he'd give Flair a rematch anytime, anywhere. Jim Ross interviewed the Varsity Club, with World Television Champion Mike Rotunda agreeing to put up $10,000 to anybody that can defeat him. Kevin Sullivan declared Rotunda the new captain of the Varsity Club. Jim Ross interviewed Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express, gloating about ridding the NWA of the original Midnights. Cornette talked trash about Paulie Dangerously and his new clients, the Samoan SWAT team. He predicted that he and the Midnights would get their hands on Paulie, saying, "I think it'd be hard for Paulie Dangerously to run a talk show with no teeth in his mouth." The March 11th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview the Varsity Club. They flaunted a briefcase containing $10,000, willing to give it to anyone that could beat World Television Champion Mike Rotunda. The champion said, "Competition makes me go. Competition is what the Varsity Club is all about." Rotunda filled a fishbowl with the money, warning Jim Ross not to touch his money. Paulie Dangerously hosted the Danger Zone, welcoming the United States Champion Lex Luger as his guest. Michael P.S. Hayes interrupted, talking up the humble champion. Paulie asked if they were going to be the new Freebirds, with Hayes harshly shooting him down. Hayes said that Luger is his own man and to leave the Freebird thing alone. Paulie badgered Luger to flex for him, which he conceded to. The response from Paulie was to tell Luger that all that won't win him the World Heavyweight Championship. Jim Ross interviewed the Nature Boy Ric Flair and Hiro Matsuda. Flair said, "You know that Ric Flair won't rest until he has that title around his waist again." He said that before he beats World Heavyweight Champion Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, he's going to beat Lex Luger just to shut him up. After winning an enhancement match, Sting joined Magnum TA for an interview. he apologized to the woman in the front row who had to dodge the Stinger's much larger opponent, who cleared a section of the crowd, tumbling over the top rope and to the floor. The March 18th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview Gary Hart and Hiro Matsuda, who introduced the newest member of the NWA roster. Matsuda described the Masked Man as a master in martial arts, dressed appropriately as a ninja. Hart said that he has great respect for wrestlers from the land of the rising sun. He said that thanks to Matsuda, he now has in his stable the most dangerous man he's seen in a long time. Hart said to watch his debut and see firsthand how great the Great Muta is. Ranger Ross made his debut, a proud member of the military that was successful in an enhancement match. Later, Magnum TA interviewed Ross, who talked about his military background. He said he'd take on anyone, anywhere, especially the Iron Sheik. Jim Ross interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who discussed Ric Flair. The champion said, "I'm sick and tired of you going around telling everyone that you are the man. And to be the man, you have to beat the man. I don't want to be the man. I am my own person, but I did beat you fair and square." Steamboat said he'd face Flair anywhere and said, "I've got your number. You sound desperate, and desperate men make mistakes." Jim Ross interviewed Ric Flair, who guaranteed he'd become the World Heavyweight Champion for the 6th time. Flair was insulted to be the challenger and was doubtful Steamboat could beat him again. Gary Hart led the Great Muta to the ring for his debut. Muta showcased his high-flying skills, winning his enhancement match in impressive fashion. In the main event, United States Champion Lex Luger and Michael P.S. Hayes battled Barry and Kendall Windham. Out of nowhere, Hayes attacked Luger from behind. This allowed Barry Windham to pin Luger for the victory. Hayes joined the Windhams in assaulting Luger. Jim Ross interviewed Hayes, who said, "When you want a punk, go get him 'cause he's a boy. When you want a man, you come to me 'cause I'm the real McCoy." JR scolded Hayes for taking the money of Hiro Matsuda. The March 25th episode of World Championship Wrestling began with Jim Ross introducing his new co-host, Michael P.S. Hayes. Hiro Matsuda informed Ross that he'd bought the spot, saying Hayes would be appearing every week. Pre-taped footage aired of a promo Lex Luger had cut earlier that day. He challenged Michael P.S. Hayes to face him anytime, anywhere. Back in the studio, Jim Ross interviewed Michael Hayes, who said that Luger was just a victim of circumstance. He hyped the Yamasaki Corporation as buying the greatest team in wrestling, the Windhams, Butch Reed, Hayes, and Nature Boy Ric Flair. Paulie Dangerously hosted another edition of The Danger Zone, interviewing Cougar J, with Secret Service Jack Victory lurking in the background. Randy Rose interrupted, saying his lawyers found loopholes to get him back in the NWA. Paulie said he wouldn't be Rose's manager, with Victory attacking Rose from behind. After winning an enhancement match in impressive fashion, the Great Muta stood by Gary Hart for an interview with Jim Ross and Michael Hayes. Hart hyped the dangerous skills of Muta, saying he comes from the cesspool of sin. Muta was called the Pearl of the Orient, with Hart saying that they're so feared they could walk down the baddest streets and come out unscathed. Hart closed by congratulating Hayes on making the right move. Footage aired of Kevin Sullivan and Dr. Death Steve Williams defending the United States Tag Team titles against Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert and Rick Steiner. Sullivan made a crucial mistake, jaw-jacking with Missy Hyatt, allowing Gilbert to roll him up for a pinfall victory. Gilbert and Steiner were crowned the new United States Tag Team Champions. Jim Ross and Michael Hayes interviewed the Varsity Club, with Kevin Sullivan claiming Gilbert and Steiner were going to lose a lot more in their return match. The April 1st edition of World Championship Wrestling began with Jim Ross announcing that this would be the final broadcast from the hallowed halls of TBS Studios. In the opening match, Shane Douglas made his return, winning an enhancement match. Bob Orton Jr. made his debut, winning an enhancement match with a superplex. After the match, Gary Hart announced that he'd be representing Orton, who hyped his match the following night against Dick Murdoch. Paulie Dangerously hosted the Danger Zone, protected by Jack Victory in the background. The guests were Gary Hart, Hiro Matsuda, and the Great Muta. Hart hyped the recent success of Muta, with Paulie saying that Muta reminds him of Great Kabuki. It was more than a coincidence, with Hart announcing that Muta was the son of Kabuki. In the main event, Mike Rotunda defended the World Television Championship against Sting. Things heated up, with Sting nailing a beautiful high cross body off the top rope onto Rotunda. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Lex Luger came to the ring, with the rest of the Varsity Club cheering from the opposite corner. Sullivan handed Rotunda a foreign object, which the champion used to bash Sting. But the Stinger battled back, nailing a Stinger Splash and locking in the Scorpion Deathlock. Dr. Death Steve Williams distracted the referee, while Sullivan clobbered Sting from behind. Rotunda covered the challenger, with Sting getting his foot on the bottom rope just in time. After a back-and-forth exchange, Sting rolled up Rotunda and scored the pinfall victory. Sting was crowned the new World Television Champion and won $10,000. The Clash of the Champions, the Ragin' Cajun, took place on April 2nd from New Orleans. Footage aired of legends being honored the night prior, featuring the likes of Terry Funk, Lou Thez, Gene Kiniski, Sam Mushnick, Pat O'Connor, Buddy Rogers, Dory Funk Jr., and Harley Race. Jim Herd gave a speech saying that he promised to protect the credibility that the legends have established. Jim Cornette's team of the Midnight Express battled Paulie Dangerously's team of the Samoan SWAT team. It was a wild bout that even saw the two managers throw punches at one another on the apron. The Midnights hit a rocket launcher on Samu, with beautiful Bobby Eaton making the pin. While the referee attended to the brawling managers, Fatu clobbered Eaton on the back of the head with Paulie's cell phone. Samu made the cover, with the referee turning around and making the 3 count. A New Orleans marching band played the Junkyard Dog to the ring for a match with the Natural Butch Reed. JYD was successful in the end, whipping Reed into Matsuda and then scoring the pinfall victory. Eddie Gilbert and Rick Steiner defended the United States Tag Team titles against the Varsity Club, Kevin Sullivan and Dangerous Dan Spivey. At ringside was Missy Hyatt, who passed her purse to Gilbert, who in turn clobbered Sullivan with it and scored a pinfall victory. The fight continued, with Sullivan and Spivey pulverizing Gilbert and busting him open. Steiner made the save, wielding a chair to clear the ring. In the main event, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat defended the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against the Nature Boy Ric Flair in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Flair made a grand entrance surrounded by women, while Steamboat was accompanied by his wife and carried his young son. Terry Funk sat in on commentary with Jim Ross, calling an absolute classic. They slapped each other's faces, showing no fear in the early moments. Steamboat out-wrestled Flair during the first fall, with an errant kick below the belt and a closed fist, allowing Flair to gain an advantage. It wasn't long as Steamboat took over and began a series of near falls. They traded blistering chops at a grueling pace, with Funk audibly impressed at the brutality. Steamboat went for a splash, with Flair pulling the knees up and the champion crashing onto them. Flair frantically attempted multiple pinfalls with no success. On commentary, Funk said, "Now this is professional wrestling right here, at its greatest." Flair and Steamboat battled in a test of strength, fighting out of it to chop at each other. Funk said, "What can you say except ouch?" Steamboat missed a dropkick, with Flair trying to capitalize with a figure 4. The champion rolled up Flair in a small package, only getting a 2 count. Flair reversed it and scored a pinfall victory to win the first fall in just under 20 minutes. Steamboat charged at Flair to begin the second fall, hitting a series of high-impact maneuvers. He dropped a dozen elbows on the left knee of Flair and then locked in a figure 4 leg lock. When that didn't work, Steamboat locked in a Boston Crab, with Flair screaming in pain. Another chop fest ensued, before Flair took the fight to the floor and whipped Steamboat against a steel guardrail. Flair followed it up by body slamming the champion on the floor and then sending him crashing against another guardrail. Steamboat wobbled onto the apron, with Flair knocking him down with a right hand. Flair suplexed the champion into the ring and made the cover, but only gained a 2 count. The challenger was desperate, trying nearly a dozen pinfall attempts with no success. Steamboat rolled up Flair, with the challenger kicking out with authority, sending the Dragon tumbling through the ropes. Desperation continued, with Flair scurrying for a pinfall. Flair climbed to the top rope, with Steamboat catching up and nailing a huge superplex. Steamboat lifted Flair in the air with a double chicken wing, with the Dragon winning the second fall by submission. The third fall saw the exhausted competitors hanging on by a thread. They chopped away at each other, with Steamboat breaking out a double chop. Flair begged for Steamboat to back off, only to roll him up for multiple pinfall attempts with his feet on the ropes for leverage. Steamboat charged at Flair with a high knee to the corner, with the Nature Boy moving and the Dragon getting hung up in the ropes. The champion injured his knee, and Flair honed in on it. Flair applied the figure 4 leg lock in the middle of the ring. Steamboat rocked back and forth, with the two rolling all the way out of the ring. Flair rammed Steamboat's knee repeatedly on the side of the ring. Back in the ring, Flair connected with a high cross body on Steamboat, only scoring a 2 count. Shortly after, Steamboat nailed his own high cross body, only getting a 2 count. Steamboat hit a reverse neckbreaker, but only got a 2. A frustrated Flair tossed Steamboat to the floor, with the champion sunset flipping his way into the ring, only getting a 2 count on Flair. The Nature Boy locked in a figure 4, with Steamboat rapidly losing consciousness. Steamboat battled out of the hold, ramming Flair face first into the top turnbuckle and falling out of the ring. Flair rolled back in, with Steamboat leveling him with an enziguri. Steamboat missed a big splash off the top rope, with both men regaining their breath. On commentary, Funk already predicted that this was the match of the year. Both men chopped away at one another, with Funk saying, "These are two of the greatest athletes, bar none, in the world today." Flair climbed to the top rope, with Steamboat slamming him to the mat. The champion hoisted Flair up for a double-arm chicken wing, with his leg giving out beneath him. Still, Steamboat had Flair's arms locked and his shoulders on the mat. The champion's shoulders were also down, with the referee making a 3 count. Despite Flair's foot being under the bottom rope, the referee awarded the match to Steamboat. An irate Flair informed referee Tommy Young of his faux pas. Backstage, Jim Ross interviewed the champion, congratulating Steamboat on retaining his title. Steamboat said that he's proven himself, and it's time to move on from Flair and give somebody else a chance. Ross informed Steamboat that Flair's foot was under the bottom rope, with the champion confirming it after the footage was shown. Steamboat admitted that Flair had a legitimate gripe, but still considered himself the better man. The April 8th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Lex Luger face Kendall Windham. Michael Hayes raced to the ring, distracting Luger. This allowed Kendall to attack Luger from behind and climb to the top rope. Kendall jumped, with Luger catching him with a power slam to the mat for a pinfall victory. Paul Lee dangerously hosted the Danger Zone, flying solo, proclaiming he didn't need a bodyguard. His guest was the new World Television Champion, Sting, with Paul Lee telling him he's going to have to start taking things seriously. Instead, Sting insulted him and laughed in his face. Footage aired of the Road Warriors defending the World Tag Team titles against Mike Rotunda and Dr. Death Steve Williams. The action got out of hand, with Animal swiping referee Teddy Long out of the way. Hawk leaped off the top rope, clotheslining Rotunda off the shoulders of Animal. While Hawk made the cover, Long stood in the corner and refused to count the pinfall. Dr. Death rolled Hawk up from behind, with Long making a fast count, leading to new World Tag Team Champions. From the control room, Jim Ross interviewed the Executive Vice President, Jim Herd. He announced that a rematch would take place on May 7th between the NWA World Heavyweight Champion Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and the Nature Boy Ric Flair at WrestleWar on pay-per-view. 3 judges would be seated at ringside to determine an undisputed winner. Randy Rose was vicious in his match against Jack Victory, with Paul Lee dangerously lurking around ringside. With the referee's back turned, Paul Lee clobbered Rose on the back of the head with his cell phone. Victory made the cover and scored a pinfall victory. World Heavyweight Champion Ricky the Dragon Steamboat cut a promo, admitting that he can't claim to be the winner of the 2 out of 3 falls match. He said that WrestleWar would be Ric Flair's last chance at the title. Steamboat said, "I have got to move on to other horizons." Ric Flair cut a promo saying he was born to be the champ. He claimed to have the greatest career ever, making it easy to convince Ted Turner to sign a rematch. Flair said, "To be the man, you've got to beat the man, and God knows I'm the man." The April 15th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview the World Television Champion, Sting. They were soon joined by Rick Steiner, who endorsed Sting as a great champion. The Iron Sheik interrupted, challenging Sting to put up his title and also take the Persian Club Challenge. The Road Warriors cut a promo, with Animal saying that nobody's going to stop them from taking back their World Tag Team titles. Hawk said that they were going to punish the Varsity Club for stealing from them. A rematch took place between Randy Rose and Jack Victory, with Paulie dangerously at ringside. Victory used Paulie's telephone, swinging it at Rose. He missed, with Rose planting him with an atomic drop. Referee Teddy Long grabbed the phone, with Victory leveling Rose from behind with a second phone. Despite seeing the entire thing, Long made the 3 count, with Victory victorious. Rick Steiner made his way to the ring for a match, with a woman in the crowd hugging him excitedly. The woman cheered repeatedly for Steiner, who was successful in his enhancement match. Kevin Sullivan got a hold of Jim Ross's microphone, calling out Missy Hyatt. He said, "If that is your idea of a man, we all know Eddie Gilbert's nothing but a little boy, and compared to me, he's no man if you catch my drift." Hyatt slapped Sullivan, riling him up while Steiner stood guard. NWA World Heavyweight Champion Ricky the Dragon Steamboat battled Ron Simmons. Steamboat was victorious, pinning Simmons with a crucifix roll-up. Jim Cornette cut a promo, talking about the whereabouts of the Midnight Express. He bragged about their past accomplishments, but cited a lingering injury Bobby Eaton has been battling through. Cornette said he and the Midnight Express aren't nice guys, and they're the best in professional wrestling. He said they're done making excuses, and they're taking time off to heal up. Cornette said that if they can't be the best tag team in professional wrestling, then they're not going to do it at all. After winning an enhancement match, United States Champion Lex Luger hopped the guardrail and confronted Michael P.S. Hayes on commentary. Luger called Hayes obnoxious and challenged him to fight in the ring. A wild brawl ensued between the two as the show went off the air. The April 22nd episode of World Championship Wrestling saw the debut of Tonga, the Polynesian Savage. Tonga quickly won his enhancement match with a brainbuster. Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert and Rick Steiner defended the United States Tag Team titles against the Samoan SWAT team. Missy Hyatt attacked Paulie dangerously at ringside, with Kevin Sullivan soon emerging. Sullivan dragged Missy by the hair, luring Steiner out of the ring and right into a clothesline from a waiting Dan Spivey. Gilbert attacked Sullivan, leading to a wild brawl, with the Samoan SWAT team winning by countout. The April 22nd episode of Worldwide Wrestling saw the World Heavyweight Champion Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and the United States Champion Lex Luger face the Nature Boy Ric Flair and Michael P.S. Hayes. In the end, Hayes used brass knuckles to clobber Luger's forehead in order to escape a back suplex. Hayes covered Luger and scored the pinfall victory. The April 29th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw the World Heavyweight Champion Ricky the Dragon Steamboat confront the Nature Boy Ric Flair, who was joined by multiple women. The Nature Boy sounded confident, but Steamboat said that Flair sounded like a used car salesman and he's not buying it. The Junkyard Dog battled Ron Simmons, with referee Teddy Long making a fast count in favor of Simmons. Jim Ross interviewed Executive Vice President Jim Herd, who fired Long. The Iron Sheik demonstrated the Persian clubs, daring Sting to give it a try. Sting was confused, goading Sheik into demonstrating the feat 2 more times. Once the Sheik was exhausted, Sting said he'd see him at WrestleWar. Jim Ross interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Ric Flair soon interrupted, surrounded by women, and calling Steamboat the greatest athlete he's ever been in the ring with. The main event saw the World Tag Team Champions, Mike Rotunda and Dr. Death Steve Williams, battle the United States Tag Team Champions, Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert and Rick Steiner. Kevin Sullivan got involved, cutting Eddie Gilbert's hair on the floor. Missy Hyatt jumped on Sullivan's back, with the Games Master tossing her to the ground. The Road Warriors interfered to make the save. The May 6th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview Michael P.S. Hayes. He said that he never needed anyone and declared himself the only Freebird. Hayes hyped his upcoming match at WrestleWar against the United States Champion, Lex Luger. Jim Ross interviewed Theodore Long, who didn't understand why he was fired. The crowd booed him as he defended his actions, claiming he was framed. Long said that everybody, from Jim Herd to the fans, is going to be sorry. A music video aired, hyping the debut of the Dynamic Dudes, Shane Douglas and Johnny Ace. They were shown eating pizza and shopping for skateboards. The Dudes made their in-ring debut, winning an enhancement match. WrestleWar took place on May 7th, live on pay-per-view from Nashville, Tennessee. Lance Russell interviewed the 3 judges for the NWA World Championship match, 3 former world champions, Lou Thesz, Pat O'Connor, and Terry Funk. They all said they'd be looking at technique when making a decision should the match between champion Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and the Nature Boy Ric Flair go to a draw. Lex Luger defended the United States Championship against Michael P.S. Hayes, who had Hiro Matsuda in his corner. Matsuda attacked Luger on the floor, while Hayes distracted referee Nick Patrick. Luger battled back and attempted to lift Hayes up for a torture rack. Hayes dodged it and planted Luger with a DDT, only scoring a 2 count. With the referee knocked out, Terry Gordy emerged from the crowd. With great force, Gordy shoved Hayes, who flopped on top of Luger for a cover. A wary Nick Patrick made the 3 count, with Michael Hayes becoming the new NWA United States Champion. Sting defended the World Television Championship against the Iron Sheik. Rip Morgan distracted the referee, allowing Sheik to attack Sting with the Iranian flagpole. Sting battled back, nailing Sheik with a Stinger Splash and making him submit to the Scorpion Deathlock. Lance Russell interviewed the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who was prepared for his match with Nature Boy Ric Flair. Steamboat said that with the judges at ringside, there will be a decisive winner. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat defended the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Nature Boy Ric Flair. Flair made his entrance with 6 women by his side and 36 surrounding the ring. Steamboat and his wife Bonnie brought out their son, who sat upon a white pony. Former NWA World Heavyweight Champions Lou Thesz, Pat O'Connor, and Terry Funk sat at ringside as the judges, with their decisions deciding the winner should the match end in controversy. The bell rang, with the two slapping one another in the face and then jockeyed for position. A chop fest ensued between the two, with Flair slithering to the floor to recover. Back in the ring, Steamboat wrenched on the left arm of Flair, with the Nature Boy screaming in pain. The champion soon sent Flair sailing over the top rope with a dropkick, with referee Tommy Young holding back Steamboat from sailing over the ropes. Back in the ring, Flair chopped away at Steamboat, with Jim Ross and Bob Caudle announcing that the judges had Steamboat ahead by points thus far. The champion battled back until Flair dodged a crossbody and Steamboat fell over the ropes and to the floor. Flair followed, chopping Steamboat over the guardrail and into the front row. Steamboat chopped his way back over the guardrail, chasing Flair into the ring and nailing a chop to the head off the top rope. The champion went back to work on the left arm, but soon missed another crossbody and sailed over the top rope. Flair wore down Steamboat and scrambled for a pinfall to no avail. He hit Steamboat with a butterfly suplex and an elbow drop, but was still unable to score a pinfall. Desperately, Steamboat leapt at Flair, who dodged the attack, sending the champion throat first into the ropes. Flair suplexed Steamboat on the floor, but failed to suplex him back into the ring as the champion wiggled free and rolled up the Nature Boy for a 2 count. They were both sent sailing over the top rope after a high cross body from Flair. Steamboat slammed Flair off the top rope, beginning an assault on the challenger. The champion cradled Flair, only getting a 2 count. Flair responded by sticking his thumb in the champion's eye. Still, Steamboat suplexed Flair onto the top rope and suplexed him back down to the mat. Steamboat launched himself off the top rope, nailing Flair with a big chop to the head. The champion climbed the ropes again, with Flair shaking the ropes and sending Steamboat crashing to the floor, injuring his leg. Flair suplexed Steamboat back into the ring and then applied the figure 4 leg lock, aggravating the already injured leg of the Dragon. Steamboat screamed in pain every time the Nature Boy wrenched in the hold. Dramatically, Steamboat made it to the ropes to break the hold. Flair chopped at the leg, with Steamboat chopping back every time until nailing an enziguri. Steamboat went for a body slam, with Flair rolling him up with an inside cradle to score the pinfall victory and become a 6-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Steamboat raised the hand of Flair, with Tommy Young handing the Nature Boy the belt. Jim Ross interviewed the new champion to a mixed response from the fans. Flair said that Steamboat is the greatest champion he's ever faced. Terry Funk interrupted, congratulating Flair and asking him for a title match. Flair said that Funk's been away in Hollywood and has to be ranked in the top 10 in order to get a shot. Funk was bewildered, saying, "Am I not good enough?" Flair said that Funk has been in Hollywood for 5 years and he's only worried about the top 10. Funk claimed he was only kidding, but then rocked the champion with a punch to the face. The beatdown continued, with Funk battering Flair on the floor and into the front row. Funk nailed Flair with a pile driver onto the judge's table. The champion immediately grabbed his neck, with Funk flipping the table onto Flair. Funk clobbered Flair with a steel chair, and then screamed to the crowd, "I'm not good enough." Stealing the microphone, Funk said, "Look at the horse-toothed banana-nosed jerk." On commentary, Jim Ross said, "This man is absolutely crazy." The NWA World Tag Team Champions, Dr. Death Steve Williams and Mike Rotunda, made their entrance with a cheerleading squad. They defended their titles against the Rough and Ready Road Warriors. The Games Master Kevin Sullivan was quickly ejected from ringside by special guest referee Nikita Koloff. The Legion of Doom nailed Dr. Death with a Doomsday device and had the match won. That was until Sullivan and Dan Spivey pulled Koloff out of the ring and attacked him. The brawling continued, with the Varsity Club disqualified for their deed. In the main event, United States Tag Team Champions Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert and Rick Steiner defended their titles against the Games Master Kevin Sullivan and Dangerous Dan Spivey. Things quickly got out of hand, with Spivey attacking Steiner and ramming him repeatedly shoulder first against a steel ring post. This left Gilbert to fend for himself, taking a beating. The end came when Steiner charged at Sullivan with a big clothesline, with Gilbert scoring a pinfall victory. Spivey attacked Steiner with a chair, while Sullivan stomped on Gilbert. Sullivan grabbed Missy Hyatt by the hair, with Gilbert swinging a chair to make the save. Before the show went off the air, Jim Ross announced that Dr. Death Steve Williams and Mike Rotunda were stripped of the NWA World Tag Team titles. The May 13th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview Terry Funk about his attack on Nature Boy Ric Flair. Funk referred to the fans as simple-minded people. He mocked the injured Flair, even saying the Nature Boy was pretending to be hurt. Funk called Flair a coward and said he should be a champion in the NWA. The Fabulous Freebirds, Michael P.S. Hayes and Terry Gordy, reunited, competing in an enhancement match. They were vicious, pulverizing their opponents to score an impressive victory. Jim Ross interviewed them after the match, with United States Champion Michael P.S. Hayes challenging Lex Luger to a Bad Street Rules match. Jim Ross interviewed WCW Executive Vice President Jim Herd, who announced that a tournament would be taking place to crown new World Tag Team Champions. Jim Ross interviewed Teddy Long, who introduced a video. It was a large, disturbed patient who said that people have ridiculed him his whole life. He said all these people that abused him would pay. Long called him Norman, a childhood friend of his. Kevin Sullivan faced the younger brother of Rick, Scott Steiner, who had an impressive debut. Steiner missed a shoulder tackle, ramming his shoulder against a steel ring post. Sullivan rolled up Steiner and scored the pinfall victory. He wasn't finished there, with Sullivan attacking Steiner with a chair. As Steiner rolled away to safety, the referee reversed his decision. Scott Steiner was announced the winner by disqualification. Terry Funk was scheduled to compete in an enhancement match, quickly talking his opponent out of facing him. As the young wrestler made his exit, Funk attacked him from behind, brutalizing him. The show ended with Funk nailing the young athlete with a pile driver onto the floor. The May 20th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Sting successfully defend the World Television Championship against Jack Victory. Gary Hart stood at ringside, warning Sting that the outcome would be different if he'd faced the Great Muta. Sting called out Muta, with Hart saying he'd have to wait until the time was right. Muta came out, with Hart holding him back and escorting him away. Scott Steiner was victorious in an enhancement match, with Kevin Sullivan creeping to the ring after the bell. Eddie Gilbert raced in with a chair, scaring off Sullivan and thwarting his plan. A vignette aired hyping the debut of Flyin' Brian, with footage airing of an enhancement match. He was shown working out in the gym and gnashing his teeth to the camera. Terry Funk competed in an enhancement match against a young Eddie Guerrero. On commentary, Jim Ross said that Funk had the personality of a rattlesnake. Funk was vicious, hoisting Guerrero over his shoulder and heaving him over the top rope. Guerrero responded with a high crossbody off the top rope and crashing onto Funk on the floor. His luck ran out as Funk pile drove Guerrero on the floor. Funk hoisted Guerrero's limp body into the ring and scored a pinfall victory. After the bell, Funk raced into the crowd to yell at the fans. Jim Ross interviewed Terry Funk, who called himself the best in the world. Funk told a story about a jackass, or donkey, that he used to own. One day it broke its leg, and his father killed the jackass by shooting it in the head. Funk asked his father why he'd do that, with Dory Sr. saying that the jackass had no more purpose, it's useless. He said that the NWA Board of Directors should put Ric Flair out to pasture. Funk asked Ross if he had any influence, getting on his knees and begging JR to grant him a match with Flair. He wept, asking the fans why they didn't realize he's the greatest wrestler in the world. A music video aired featuring the Dynamic Dudes dancing in an aerobics class and working out in the gym. The Road Warriors battled the Fabulous Freebirds in a first-round match in the NWA World Tag Team Title Tournament. It was a wild bout, which saw the Samoan SWAT team attack Animal on the floor and drag him into the crowd. Hawk followed, brawling with Fatu, while the referee declared Hayes and Gordy the winners by countout. The May 27th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw the Great Muta win a 3-on-1 enhancement match in impressive fashion. The Road Warriors battled the Samoan SWAT team in a wild brawl that ended in a double disqualification. Animal and Fatu brawled through the crowd and back to ringside. Both teams continued brawling up the aisle and through the entranceway. Rick Steiner made his return from a shoulder injury, joining Missy Hyatt to accompany his brother Scott to ringside. A woman in the front row jumped for joy at the sight of Rick and gave him a teddy bear. Scott was victorious in his match, defeating Jack Victory. The Samoan SWAT team battled Ron Simmons and Ranger Ross in a first-round match in the NWA World Tag Team Title Tournament. During the bout, Teddy Long came to ringside and talked Simmons off the apron. Meanwhile, Ross was getting pummeled in the ring. Frustrated, Ross approached Simmons on the floor to get his attention. Simmons ultimately left with Long, while the SST advanced in the tournament. Jim Cornette cut a promo saying the Midnight Express are coming back to the NWA. Cornette also mentioned that he had unfinished business with Paulie Dangerously. Footage aired of a recent interview with Ric Flair's doctor, Dr. Restwanik, who said Flair had a ruptured neck. He said Flair had a pinched nerve that was affecting his arm. Dr. Restwanik said it would take rest and healing before he could give a recovery time. He worries about the safety of Flair's neck should he return to the ring. Jim Ross interviewed Terry Funk, who said he'd pay Ric Flair's round-trip ticket to be there next week. The June 3rd edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Ranger Ross get his hands on Ron Simmons. Teddy Long played a role in the outcome, handing Simmons a pair of brass knuckles. Simmons clobbered Ross and scored a pinfall victory. A music video aired, hyping the debut of Flyin' Brian. Footage of Brian competing was spliced in with footage of him flying in a plane. Jim Ross interviewed Terry Funk, who introduced an out-of-shape Ric Flair imposter. Funk had the Flair imposter take off his robe, revealing a yellow stripe down his back. He then referred to Flair as the real-life Old Yeller. Sting interrupted, talking trash to Funk. The two brawled in the ring, with Sting getting the best of Funk. Members of the locker room raced to the ring in an attempt to separate Sting and Funk, who are at one another's throats. A music video aired hyping the debut of Gator Scott Hall. He was shown walking towards an alligator, who scurried away into the water. Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express made their return, facing Teddy Long's team of Butch Reed and the Raider. The Midnights were victorious, advancing in the World Tag Team Title Tournament. The June 10th edition of World Championship Wrestling featured footage of Missy Hyatt interrupting an interview Bob Caudle was conducting with Kevin Sullivan, Gary Hart, and the Great Muta. Hyatt said that Sullivan was no man. This caused Muta to spit green mist into the eyes of Hyatt, who screeched in pain. Jim Ross interviewed Terry Funk, who had just cracked the top 10 rankings. Funk talked about his father dying in his arms and all the people that came to his funeral. Years later, when Funk visited the gravesite, nobody was there. The grave said F-U-N-K, with Terry swearing that he would make that name synonymous with wrestling forever. And he'll step on anyone to do it, even Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Funk went too far, saying he'd step over Steamboat's half-breed son. Out came the Dragon, who confronted Funk, grabbing him by the shirt. The footage cut to Lex Luger in the studio, demanding interview time. Luger said he needs to be on the Clash of the Champions. He also said he should be the #1 contender since he's the United States Champion. Luger proclaimed himself the King of the Hill. The rest of the footage aired of Jim Ross interviewing Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who talked about his disgust for Terry Funk. Steamboat hyped his upcoming match at the Clash of the Champions against Funk. Rick and Scott Steiner, the Steiner brothers, made their debut as a team, led to the ring by Missy Hyatt. On the way to the ring, Rick gave his jacket to his #1 female fan in the front row. The Steiners were victorious in their enhancement match. After the bell, Kevin Sullivan and Mike Rotunda attacked the Steiners, brawling as the show went off the air. The Clash of the Champions, Guts and Glory, took place on June 14th. Michael Hayes revealed his new tag team partner in the Fabulous Freebirds, Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin. They battled the Dynamic Dudes in a second-round match in the NWA World Tag Team Title Tournament. Hayes nailed Shane Douglas with a DDT, with Garvin scoring the pinfall victory. Terry Gordy celebrated with the Freebirds, who advanced to the finals of the World Tag Team Title Tournament. The Ding Dongs made their debut, a masked duo that wore salmon-colored bodysuits with bells printed on them. Bells also hung from their boots. Whichever one was on the apron rang a bell, while the other competed in the ring. Needless to say, the crowd was less than pleased. The bells fell off the outfits and laid all over the ring, while the Ding Dongs were victorious. At the end of the match, Jim Ross on commentary said, "Oh, that was horrible." Jim Cornette's Midnight Express battled Paulie Dangerously's team of the Samoan SWAT team in a second-round match in the NWA World Tag Team Title Tournament. The Road Warriors interfered, attacking the Samoans and allowing the Midnights to score the victory. In a match dubbed as the Battle of the Bulls, Terry Gordy faced Dr. Death Steve Williams. It was a bruising brawl, with the two clobbering one another mercilessly. Gordy retreated up the aisle, with Dr. Death chasing after him. This led to a disappointing double countout. Teddy Long introduced Norman, a disturbed mental patient who wore a seatbelt as a headband and competed in scrubs. Despite Long urging the fans not to, the fans called Norman a lunatic. Norman was successful in an enhancement bout in 47 seconds. After the bout, nurses strapped Norman onto a gurney and wheeled him away. The Steiner brothers battled Kevin Sullivan and Mike Rotunda. Sullivan was vicious, tossing the steel ring steps at the shoulder of Scott Steiner. Rotunda suplexed Scott onto a steel chair behind the referee's back, eventually scoring a pinfall victory. Sting defended the World Television Championship against Wild Bill Irwin. Making a crucial mistake, Irwin paid more attention to his bull rope. This allowed Sting to hit a Stinger Splash on Irwin and roll him up for a pinfall victory. Jim Ross interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair, from his home. Flair sported a neck brace, saying that he's been looking at the possibility of life after wrestling. He said his left arm was numb, and he'd make an announcement on July 1st about his future. Flair said that he won't come back unless he's 100%. He said, "Terry Funk, if you are watching, don't sleep while at night, because Ric Flair, 30 days from now or a year from now, will be at your door." In the finals of the NWA World Tag Team Title Tournament, the Fabulous Freebirds faced the Midnight Express. Paulie dangerously attacked Jim Cornette from behind with a loaded tennis racket prior to the bout. Terry Gordy interfered, nailing beautiful Bobby Eaton with a powerbomb. This allowed gorgeous Jimmy Garvin to score a pinfall victory, with the Freebirds winning the World Tag Team titles. In the main event, number 10 contender Terry Funk faced number 1 contender Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Funk began a wild chop fest with the Dragon, ultimately regretting his decision. On commentary, Jim Ross said he got chopped right out of the double-cross boots. Funk took the fight to the floor, where Steamboat lit up his chest again with thunderous chops. They weren't in the ring long when Steamboat sent Funk tumbling over the top rope and crashing to the floor. Steamboat perched himself upon the top rope, diving onto Funk on the floor below with a big chop. The Dragon carried Funk all the way around the ring and slammed him on the floor. Back in the ring, Steamboat body slammed Funk over the top rope and onto the floor. Funk battled back and nailed Steamboat with a pile driver in the middle of the ring. Steamboat chopped back, with a desperate Funk shoving referee Nick Patrick into harm's way. Funk threw Steamboat over the top rope, pile driving him on the floor. Steamboat was suplexed back into the ring, with a weary referee counting a pin for Funk. The Dragon kicked out, with a desperate Funk launching himself off the top rope. Steamboat got his knees up, injuring the abdominal region of Funk. The Dragon began an assault, with a desperate Funk grabbing a microphone. Funk clobbered Steamboat with the weapon to cause a disqualification. Lex Luger raced to the ring with a chair, with Funk retreating. Luger grabbed the microphone, saying people think he's too arrogant. He helped up Steamboat, but then leveled him with a big clothesline. Luger grabbed a chair, clobbering Steamboat over the back with it. He hoisted Steamboat up in the torture rack, throwing him down and saying, "There lays your number 1 contender." Sting ran to the ring to assist an injured Steamboat. The June 17th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview Terry Funk, who responded to Ric Flair's comments. Funk asked Flair to stick his neck out one more time for him. Jim Ross interviewed the United States Champion Lex Luger, who explained his actions at the Clash of the Champions. Luger said that Ricky the Dragon Steamboat was a victim of circumstance. He said he's been catering to the ingrate fans, but now he's reaching for the stars. Luger said he's coming after everything this sport has to offer. He said that Ric Flair either needs to defend the World Heavyweight Championship or retire. Like a shark smelling blood, Luger said he was on a feeding frenzy. Jim Ross interviewed Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express, with Cornette introducing their newest ally, Dr. Death Steve Williams. Dr. Death talked about Terry Gordy attacking him in Japan and his need to get revenge on Kevin Sullivan. In the main event, Dr. Death Steve Williams battled Terry Gordy of the Fabulous Freebirds. Michael P.S. Hayes distracted the referee, allowing Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin to trip Dr. Death as he attempted to slam Gordy with an Oklahoma Stampede. The referee turned around to make the 3 count, with Gordy scoring the pinfall victory. Jim Cornette raced to the ring to inform the official of the interference. At that, the Freebirds attacked Cornette, with the Midnight Express racing to the scene. A giant brawl erupted as the show came to a close. The debut episode of the NWA Power Hour took place on June 23rd, hosted by Jim Ross and Jim Cornette. In the opening match, the Road Warriors faced the Samoan SWAT team. The Fabulous Freebirds attacked to cause a disqualification, while the SST and Paulie Dangerously attacked and bloodied Paul Ellering. Poolside, Jim Ross interviewed the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, who sported a neck brace. Flair said that the next 7 days would be the longest of his career, hinting that he was considering retirement. Ross asked Flair about his 2 most vocal detractors, Terry Funk and Lex Luger. Flair said that if you don't want to be the champion, you shouldn't be in this business. Terry Funk debuted his new talk show, Funk's Grill, with his first guest being Missy Hyatt. Funk asked Hyatt who would win in a match between him and Flair, and she picked the Nature Boy. He tricked her into admitting Funk was the better wrestler and tried to steal a kiss. The Steiner brothers hit the scene, with Funk promptly ending the segment. The June 24th edition of World Championship Wrestling began with the Midnight Express and Dr. Death Steve Williams brawling with the Fabulous Freebirds. After winning an enhancement match, World Television Champion Sting joined Jim Ross for an interview. Sting talked about Lex Luger's actions, saying he was disappointed. Out came Luger, who said that he took Sting under his wing and made him who he is. Sting said that Luger made him sick and left. Luger went on to insult the fans and talk trash about Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. The Fabulous Freebirds agreed to grant the Midnight Express a World Tag Team Championship match. Terry Gordy got involved, clobbering Bobby Eaton off the top rope and crashing against a steel guardrail. The referee awarded the Freebirds a count-out victory as Stan Lane and Jim Cornette attended to an injured Eaton. Jim Ross interviewed the Steiner brothers and Missy Hyatt, with Rick walking hand in hand with the fan that's been seen in the front row. Her name was Robin Green, and Rick was embarrassed when Scott called her Rick's girlfriend. Rick gave Robin flowers, and she kissed him on the cheek. While the Steiners competed, Kevin Sullivan and Mike Rotunda harassed Green and ripped up the flowers Rick had given her. Jim Ross interviewed Terry Funk, who was impatient in waiting for the Nature Boy Ric Flair's big announcement. Funk declared that he would be the next NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Jim Ross interviewed Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, who introduced the returning former NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Wildfire Tommy Rich. Meanwhile, Gary Hart confronted Gilbert for attempting to throw a fireball at the Great Muta at the Clash of the Champions. Gilbert wound up attacking Hart, which brought out Muta, who sprayed red mist in Gilbert's eyes. Muta then attacked Gilbert with a kendo stick as the show went off the air. The June 30th edition of the NWA Power Hour saw Flyin' Brian make his debut, teaming with Ricky Santana to win an enhancement match. Also making their debut was Teddy Long's newest tag team, the Skyscrapers, Dan Spivey and Sid Vicious. The two big men put on a dominating performance, winning their enhancement match with ease. Terry Funk hosted another edition of Funk's Grill, with his guest being the United States Champion, Lex Luger. Funk and Luger agreed, if either one were the NWA World Champion, they'd grant one another a shot. The July 1st edition of Worldwide Wrestling saw World Television Champion Sting win an enhancement match with a Scorpion Deathlock. Following the bout, Terry Funk assaulted Sting with a branding iron. Blood spilled from Sting's forehead as he lay unconscious in the ring. Funk left Sting battered to jawjack with the fans. The July 1st episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Herd host a press conference concerning the career of the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair. The Nature Boy spoke at the podium, saying that he would continue wrestling. Flair then asked Herd to sign a match between Terry Funk and himself. The match would take place on July 23rd at the Great American Bash, with Flair sitting down with Herd to sign the contract. Jim Ross interviewed Terry Funk, who said, "There isn't a doubt in my mind, because my daddy was a pistol and I'm a son of a gun. I'm meaner than a rattlesnake, tougher than shoe leather, more dangerous than a hollow-eyed scorpion, and middle-aged and crazy, and that is exactly how I got this match, because I am middle-aged and crazy, but crazy like a fox. And I'll see you later, sonny boy, when I got that gold belt around my waist." The Skyscrapers were in action, dominating their opponents in an enhancement match. Following their victory, the Skyscrapers hoisted their manager, the unpopular Teddy Long, on their shoulders. Ric Flair made a surprise return, joining a surprise Jim Ross for an interview. The World Heavyweight Champion said, "Ric Flair is back in this sport." Flair said, "On the 23rd of July, 1989, I am going to kick your Texas ass. And that's the bottom line." The July 7th episode of the NWA Power Hour saw Terry Funk host another edition of Funk's Grill. Funk's guest was Paul E. Dangerously, who did an impression of Funk. However, Funk said, "I know who it is, that's my Uncle Herman." Paul Lee said that he was impersonating the next World Heavyweight Champion. The July 8th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. They discussed Steamboat's match with United States Champion Lex Luger, with the Dragon asking for the match to be no disqualification. He said, "Things are about to change. The Dragon is breathing fire." Flying Brian was in action, winning an enhancement match with a big splash off the top rope. Jim Ross interviewed the United States Champion, Lex Luger, who didn't agree to the no disqualification stipulation that Ricky Steamboat had proposed. Luger said that nobody is going to dictate terms to him. Paulie Dangerously hosted the Danger Zone with his guest Terry Funk, who said that he had more heart than the World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair. Funk said he was going to tarnish and end the career of Flair at the Great American Bash. He led the fans in a "We Want Flair" chant and then said, "I want Flair." Jim Ross interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair, who said that he was going to kill Terry Funk. Flair hyped their upcoming bout at the Great American Bash, saying they will have to carry Funk away after the match. The July 14th edition of the NWA Power Hour saw Terry Funk host another edition of Funk's Grill. His guests were Gary Hart and the Great Muta, with Funk inquiring about the meaning behind the mist. Hart said that when Muta spits mist, he's summoning the spirits of Shogun and Ninja Warriors. For good luck, Muta blew green mist onto the hand of Funk, in hopes it aid him in taking the World Heavyweight Championship from Ric Flair. The Samoan SWAT team were nowhere to be found, with Paulie Dangerously wondering where they could be. Freebird members Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and Terry Gordy took their place, facing the Road Warriors in a steel cage match. The SST arrived, restraining the referee, while Michael P.S. Hayes stole the keys to open the cage. Outnumbered, the Legion of Doom were helpless. Animal was handcuffed to the top rope, while the SST threw Hawk like a spear into the side of the cage. The Freebirds joined in on the beatdown, with the Road Warriors left beaten and Hawk left bloody. Backstage, Jim Ross interviewed an irate Animal, who said, "No matter what it takes, we are going to get even." The July 15th episode of NWA Pro saw Sandy Scott moderate a contract signing for a big match. Sitting at the table were the World Television Champion Sting and Gary Hart, with the Great Muta standing in the background. Before the signing, Hart said that this would be a battle of the best from the United States and Japan. After signing, Hart said that Sting was going to lose. Sting laughed it off and signed the contract to make things official for the Great American Bash. The July 15th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview Jim Cornette, discussing his upcoming match at the Great American Bash against Paulie Dangerously. Cornette said, "We ain't gonna have a wrestling match 'cause we can't wrestle. We're going to have a fight, and I'm going to win it." Paulie Dangerously hosted the Danger Zone, with his guest being the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair. Paulie taunted Flair for risking his life to face Terry Funk. Flair wasn't fazed, riling up Paulie by calling this Ric Flair's zone. The champion addressed Funk, saying that he'd pay the price of a wrestling lifetime. In the main event, the Great Muta faced Scott Hall in a competitive bout. Hall had Muta hoisted high by the throat until Muta sprayed red mist in his eyes. Muta began to choke Hall with his wrist tape, while Gary Hart distracted the referee. Once free of Hart, the referee made the 3 count, giving Muta a pinfall victory. Michael P.S. Hayes interviewed Gary Hart and the Great Muta, with Hart hyping Muta's match against Sting at the Great American Bash. The July 21st episode of the NWA Power Hour saw Terry Funk host Funk's Grill. His guests were the Fabulous Freebirds, with Michael P.S. Hayes saying they'd all be champions after the Great American Bash. The July 22nd edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview the United States champion Lex Luger. The champion hyped himself as being in a league of his own. Luger then hyped his upcoming match with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and even issued a warning to the World Heavyweight Champion Nature Boy Ric Flair. Jim Ross interviewed Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who cut a fiery promo on Lex Luger. Steamboat said he was going to teach Luger a lesson and make him suffer. Paulie Dangerously hosted the Danger Zone, with his guests being the World Television Champion Sting and Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert. Paulie attempted to make Sting nervous, hyping that the Great Muta is undefeated. He then attempted to drive a wedge between Sting and Gilbert, trying to cause the champion to question the motives of Gilbert as his manager. Sting said that Paulie should be worried about getting stripped to his panties by Jim Cornette at the Great American Bash. Kevin Sullivan narrated over the construction of the War Games cage. He discussed how dangerous the match is and how it should be called War Death. Jim Ross interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair, who was more than ready for his upcoming match against Terry Funk. Flair prophesied what he intended to do to Funk at the Great American Bash and warned Lex Luger to stay focused on Ricky Steamboat. The Great American Bash Glory Days took place on July 23rd, live from Baltimore on pay-per-view. Jim Cornette battled Paulie Dangerously in a tuxedo match, with the winner being the one to strip their opponent of their tux. Paulie gained an early advantage by attacking Cornette with his cell phone. He then attacked the injured knee of Cornette, choking him with his cummerbund. They battled back and forth until Paulie poured powder into his hand. Cornette kicked the powder into Paulie's face and ripped off his pants to win the match. Paulie raced up the aisle in his bright blue underwear, with Cornette celebrating his big victory. The Steiner brothers battled Kevin Sullivan and Mike Rotunda in a Texas Tornado Rules match. With all 4 allowed to compete at once, the action was out of hand from the get-go. Rick Steiner and Sullivan brawled on the floor, hitting one another with chairs, the timekeeper's table, and even the ring steps. The chaos continued, with all 4 battling into the ring. Scott Steiner hit a high cross body off the top, knocking Rick onto the top of Sullivan and scoring a pinfall victory. Sting defended the World Television Championship against the Great Muta. Gary Hart stood in the corner of Muta, while Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert accompanied the champion. The match began with Sting leaping from one ring into another, colliding with Muta. Not long after, Muta hit a big chop off the top rope onto Sting. Muta nailed a high cross body over the top rope onto Sting on the floor. Sting responded with a clothesline off the top rope, crashing into Muta. Shortly after, Muta slowed things down, wearing down Sting with submission maneuvers. Just as Sting was gaining the advantage, Muta sprayed red mist. Sting dodged it, with referee Nick Patrick covered in the mysterious red substance. The champion attempted a Stinger splash, with Muta dodging it and nailing a moonsault off the top rope. Referee Tommy Young ran in to make the count, with Muta only getting a 2. Sting pinned Muta after a back suplex, with both their shoulders seemingly on the mat. Tommy Young claimed that Sting was the winner, while Nick Patrick claimed that Muta was the new champion. Muta and Hart left with the gold in controversial fashion. Lex Luger defended the United States Championship against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. The Dragon made a grand entrance, led to the ring by his wife and son, and carrying a Komodo dragon atop a log that was carried by multiple men. Luger made his entrance, posing atop a rotating platform and walking through pyro. Ring announcer Gary Michael Capetta announced that it would be a no disqualification match, but Luger refused to compete under that stipulation. Promoter Gary Juster informed Capetta that Steamboat agreed to compete in a regular match. Steamboat chopped away at Luger all the way to the floor. Luger gained the advantage back in the ring with 3 huge consecutive clotheslines. Steamboat battled back, but was soon backdropped from one ring into another. Luger brought a chair into the ring, only for Steamboat to slingshot him into the corner, smacking his face against the chair. Steamboat grabbed the chair and clobbered Luger, with Tommy Young calling for the bell. The Dragon continued clobbering Luger, eventually chasing him up the aisle with the chair. Luger was declared the winner by disqualification. The Road Warriors, the Midnight Express, and Dr. Death Steve Williams battled the Fabulous Freebirds and the Samoan SWAT team in War Games. Starting things out were Beautiful Bobby Eaton and Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin for the initial 5-minute period. Entering next was Terry Gordy, with Dr. Death Steve Williams entering 2 minutes later to save Eaton. Dr. Death press-slammed Gordy against the roof and then sent him crashing to the mat. Samu entered next, with Animal evening things up 2 minutes later. The crowd roared as Animal pulverized all of his adversaries. He hit a big tackle from one ring to another, crashing into Samu. Fatu entered next, followed by Sweet Stan Lane. Michael P.S. Hayes rounded out his team, hitting multiple DDTs. Hawk was the last to enter, nailing a double clothesline off the top rope to take down the SST. The match beyond began, with Hawk taking out each member of the Freebirds. Jim Ross described it as a demolition derby, with bodies strewn across both rings. Hawk soon made Garvin submit in a hangman's neckbreaker to win the match for his team. The SST and the Freebirds got a hold of Animal, locking everyone out. The beatdown was short, with Hawk ripping the door open to save his partner. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair defended the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Terry Funk. The challenger was accompanied by Gary Hart and an entire team of security to protect him from the hostile crowd. Flair made his entrance with 2 women on each arm to a rousing ovation amongst pyro and fireworks. Things began with Flair attacking Funk in the aisle and battering him around ringside. A chop fest ensued in the ring, with the fight going back to the floor, where Funk rammed Flair's head against a steel ring post. Funk suplexed Flair back into the ring. Minutes later, Flair suplexed Funk to the floor. They chopped one another on the floor and then returned to the ring. Funk attempted a piledriver, with Flair backdropping him over the top rope and crashing to the floor. Back in the ring, Flair attacked the neck of Funk with multiple knee drops, followed by multiple piledrivers. Funk began to crawl away up the aisle, with Flair dragging him back to the ring. Flair locked in a figure 4, with Funk breaking it by hitting the champion across the face with a branding iron, while Hart distracted the referee. Funk pounded on the bloody forehead of Flair, and then nailed him with a piledriver. The challenger pulled up the mats on the floor to expose the concrete. Funk signaled for a piledriver, but Flair reversed it with a backdrop. In the ring, Funk nailed multiple neckbreakers on the champion, and then attacked his bloody forehead. The tides turned when Flair clobbered Funk with the branding iron behind the referee's back. On the floor, Flair rammed Funk's head against a steel ring post, busting him open. Back in the ring, Funk wrenched in a spinning toe hold. Flair reversed it with a figure 4, only for Funk to roll him up for a 2 count. The champion reversed it, getting a 3 count on Funk to retain his championship. Flair leveled Hart for good measure following the match. This brought out the Great Muta, who sprayed green mist at Flair. Funk and Muta battered Flair, taking out the referee and head of security, Doug Dillinger. Sting raced in to save Flair in a wild scene. All 4 brawled, with Flair and Sting left standing tall. Just as things calmed down, the brawling continued in the aisle. Flair got a hold of the branding iron, with Funk and Muta racing up the aisle in a chaotic scene. Jim Ross interviewed Flair after the match, with the champion thanking Sting. Flair then said, "Terry Funk, we are just started, pal." He then said, "I'm going to dog you until I wear your Texas ass out." The July 29th edition of NWA Pro featured Terry Funk competing in his hometown of Amarillo to face Scott Hall. While Hall put up a solid effort, Funk finished the match with a piledriver. After his victory, Funk celebrated with his fellow Texans in the crowd. The July 29th episode of Worldwide Wrestling saw Terry Funk cut a promo about a 12-year-old boy spitting on him. Funk chased the kid down and told the kid he's supposed to spit on the dirt. He went on to call Ric Flair dirt and said, "You still have what I want, and the battle is not over. I've just begun." The August 4th edition of the NWA Power Hour saw the World Television Champion Sting and Dr. Death Steve Williams battle Terry Funk and Terry Gordy. Funk got into it with an overzealous fan at ringside, with referee Tommy Young restoring order. The match was an all-out brawl that ended in a disqualification when Gary Hart got involved. Sting hoisted Hart high up for a choke, only for Funk to clobber Sting from behind with the branding iron. Dr. Death got a hold of the branding iron, swinging it wildly, with Funk, Gordy, and Hart narrowly escaping. On the August 5th episode of World Championship Wrestling, Sting and Eddie Gilbert faced the New Zealand Militia. Just as Sting had the match won, Terry Funk and the Great Muta ambushed him. While Gilbert was knocked out by the branding iron, Sting was waffled with Funk's cowboy boot. Nature Boy Ric Flair raced to the scene, attacking both Funk and Muta to a rousing ovation. All four brawled in a wild scene. After a commercial break, Jim Ross interviewed Sting, Eddie Gilbert, and Nature Boy Ric Flair. The Nature Boy said that he was surprised to be standing side by side with Sting and Gilbert. Flair said all's fair in love and war, and then danced around in Funk's cowboy boots. The August 12th episode of the NWA Power Hour saw the Great Muta battle Eddie Gilbert in a no disqualification match. Things were wild from the start, with Muta spitting green mist in the eyes of Gilbert's manager, Missy Hyatt. As Hyatt was helped away, Gilbert clobbered Muta with a steel chair. Hart got involved, whipping Gilbert into a steel ring post on the floor. Wildfire Tommy Rich came to Gilbert's aid, cheering him on from the corner. Hart once again got involved, with Rich attacking him. Muta sprayed red mist at Rich, while Gilbert nailed Hart with a high cross body and scored a pinfall victory. Since it was anything goes, the referee allowed it. Muta sprayed green mist in the eyes of Gilbert, only to be run off by a chair-wielding Rich. Terry Funk hosted Funk's Grill with his guests, the Steiner brothers. Funk said that he hopes his two daughters are able to find someone as well put together as Scott Steiner. Rick asked about himself, but Funk was more interested in Scott. After Rick and Funk bickered, they all shared in their appreciation for Skull chewing tobacco. In the main event, Road Warrior Hawk faced Sam Moo in an all-out brawl. Paulie dangerously passed his cell phone off to Sam Moo, with Hawk getting a hold of it. Hawk clobbered Sam Moo with the phone and scored the pinfall victory. Following the bout, Paulie scolded Sam Moo, who then grabbed the phone and destroyed it. The August 12th edition of Worldwide Wrestling saw the World Tag Team Champions, the Fabulous Freebirds, battle the Steiner brothers. In a huge upset, Rick Steiner pinned Michael Hayes after assistance from brother Scott to score a pinfall victory. Unfortunately for the Steiners, the bout was non-title. Following the bout, Jim Ross interviewed the Fabulous Freebirds. They challenged the Steiner brothers to face them 1 week later, with Ross convincing the Freebirds to make it a title match. The August 12th episode of NWA Pro saw Flyin' Brian defeat Norman the Lunatic. Following the bout, Teddy Long screamed in the face of Norman, who carried Brian back to the ring. Norman hit a big splash off the ropes onto Brian, squashing him. The August 18th edition of the NWA Power Hour saw Sting defend the World Television Championship against Ron Simmons. Sting wiggled out of a suplex by Simmons and rolled him up to score a pinfall victory to retain his title. In the main event, Lex Luger defended the United States Championship against Wildfire Tommy Rich. Luger outsmarted the former world champion, using the ropes for leverage to score a pinfall victory. The August 25th episode of the NWA Power Hour saw Terry Funk host Funk's Grill. His guests were Teddy Long and Norman, but were soon interrupted by Flyin' Brian. The result was Funk and company attacking Brian, with Long getting in a cheap shot. The August 26th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Rick Steiner pacing in his hotel room. He was nervous about his first date, with Jim Ross attempting to calm him down. Steiner had Ross accompany him to the suite, where Robin Green opened the door. She was in lingerie and pulled Steiner into the room, with Ross looking on with his jaw dropped. Jim Ross interviewed Gary Hart and Dirty Dick Slater, who hyped his upcoming match against Sting. Hart said that Slater was going to take Sting to the land of mayhem and torture. Paulie Dangerously hosted the Danger Zone, with Ron Simmons and the Iron Sheik at each side, hyping their amateur credentials. Sheik called Paulie intelligent and referred to Simmons as his Muslim brother. Paulie revealed that Sheik was going to find a great foreign partner for Simmons. The Steiner brothers came to the ring accompanied by Missy Hyatt and the newly transformed Robin Green. Dolled up and wearing high leather boots and a tight corset, Green cheered the Steiners on. After the Steiners picked up the win, they joined their valets for an interview with Jim Ross. Everyone was happy for Rick, who complained that Green was touching him all the time. Scott cut a promo on the Fabulous Freebirds, saying the Steiners would take them on whenever they'd like. In the main event, Sting faced Dirty Dick Slater. During the bout, Sting hit a big dive over the top rope, clearing his target, which was Slater, and smashing onto the concrete floor. Terry Funk and the Great Muta attacked Sting to cause a disqualification, with Nature Boy Ric Flair racing to the ring. Muta roundhouse kicked Flair right in the face, with Funk tossing him to the floor. Flying Brian raced in, but was attacked by Funk. Flair ran in with the branding iron, clearing the ring, and battering Slater repeatedly. The August 26th edition of Worldwide Wrestling featured a promo from Terry Funk and Gary Hart. They said that Ric Flair was running scared and didn't want to give Funk a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. The September 1st episode of the Power Hour saw the Great Muta defend the NWA World Television Championship against Sting. The Stinger was quick with his offense, connecting with multiple aerial strikes. Terry Funk came to ringside, making a scene and distracting Sting, with Gary Hart trying to calm down the Funker. Once Funk exited, Hart attacked Sting at ringside to give Muta an unfair advantage. Muta nailed a handspring elbow, but a second high-risk move failed to deliver, instead knocking out the referee. Sting hit Muta with a Stinger Splash and locked in the Scorpion Deathlock. Hart clobbered Sting from behind to break the hold, and then woke up the referee. Muta covered Sting, with Sting barely kicking out. The champion soared off the top rope with a moonsault, only for Sting to provide a rough landing by lifting his knees. Sting nailed another Stinger splash and began punching Muta in the face. Hart attacked Sting from behind to cause a blatant disqualification. The September 2nd edition of Worldwide Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview Flying Brian and the World Heavyweight Champion Nature Boy Ric Flair. Both men hyped their upcoming bouts at the Clash of the Champions, with Pillman calling out Norman the Lunatic and Flair talking trash about Terry Funk. The September 8th episode of the Power Hour saw the Road Warriors team with the Steiner brothers to battle the Fabulous Freebirds and the Samoan SWAT team. Missy Hyatt suggested that she and Robin Green stay in the dressing room, however, Green remained at ringside. Hyatt persisted, with Green reluctantly leaving, waving goodbye to Rick Steiner as she left. Things broke down with all 8 men brawling. In the end, Scott Steiner leapt off the top rope, rolling up Michael Hayes with a sunset flip and scoring the pinfall victory for his team. The Clash of the Champions 8 Fall Brawl took place on September 12th. In the opening match, the Road Warriors battled the Samoan SWAT team, with Hawk intercepting Paulie Dangerously's cell phone to aid in the victory. Following the match, the SST walked off on Dangerously, blaming him for the loss. The Z-Man Tom Zink made his debut, defeating the Cuban Assassin with a sleeper hold. Footage aired of the governor of North Carolina reading an official mandate, making it September 12, 1989, Ric Flair Day in the state. Flair was present to accept the prestigious award. The Fabulous Freebirds defended the World Tag Team Championships against the Steiner brothers, who were accompanied by Missy Hyatt and Robin Green. Both Scott and Rick had an impressive showing, battering the champions with ease. The champions used illegal tactics behind the back of the referee to gain the advantage, even ramming Rick against a steel guardrail on the floor. Rick persevered and made the tag to Scott, who cleaned house. Just when it looked like Scott had things won, he stumbled when bouncing off the ropes. Hayes capitalized, spiking Scott with a DDT and scoring a pinfall victory. Meanwhile, Scott accused Green of tripping him up. Green blamed Missy, further adding to the confusion. Flying Brian made a grand entrance, backed by a cheerleading squad, battling Norman the Lunatic, who was managed by Teddy Long. Brian hit a springboard clothesline, followed by a dive off the top rope onto Norman on the floor. Back in the ring, Norman used his weight advantage to take down Brian, squashing him. Brian battled back, hitting a missile dropkick off the top rope, followed by an impressive body slam and a backdrop. Locking in a crucifix, Brian rolled up Norman and scored the 3 count. After the match, Long got in Norman's face, waving a key at him and screaming. The Total Package Lex Luger defended the United States Championship against Wildfire Tommy Rich. While the challenger put up a great fight, Luger caught him off guard, breaking a sleeper hold to drop Rich throat first on the top rope. Luger stumbled through the ropes, landing on Rich to score a pinfall victory, barely retaining his title. Rich chased Luger up the aisle, but the champion walked away victorious. Footage was shown of Terry Funk in a hospital with his arm bandaged, claiming he had an infection from Ric Flair beating him with a branding iron. Funk claimed that he would still make an impact at the Clash and get his hands on Flair. The WCW World Television Champion, the Great Muta, now teamed with Dirty Dick Slater to face Sting and the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. It didn't take long for things to break down, with Muta diving over the top rope onto Flair. Sting pounced over the top rope immediately after, taking out Muta and leading to a brawl between the four combatants on the floor. Back in the ring, Muta and Slater double-teamed Flair, pummeling him in their corner. Sting tagged in, hitting Muta with a Stinger Splash and locking in the Scorpion Deathlock. While the referee attended to the brawl between Flair and Slater on the floor, Gary Hart bashed Sting across the back of the head with a roll of quarters. Muta crawled on top for the cover, but Sting kicked out at 2. All four brawled in the ring, with Muta spraying yellow mist into the eyes of Sting. Flair attempted a figure 4 on Muta, with Slater clobbering the champion across the face with his casted arm. Amongst the chaos, the referee was knocked to the floor. Terry Funk raced in, putting a plastic bag over the head of a bloody Flair and attempting to suffocate him. Meanwhile, Muta held Sting's leg over the edge of the ring, with Muta using Funk's branding iron to bash the Stinger. A doctor bandaged Flair's wound at ringside to end the broadcast. The September 16th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview Ron Simmons, asking about his sudden change in attitude. Simmons cut a scathing promo, saying this is who he's always been, and he never cared about the fans. He hyped himself as a legitimate athlete, saying he's a former Heisman Trophy candidate. Simmons said, "I'm going to revolutionize this sport before I'm done." Jim Ross interviewed Gary Hart and Terry Funk, who had his arm in a sling. Ross read a statement from WCW President Jim Herd, who suspended Funk indefinitely from the NWA. Hart read the statement, scoffing at the additional $100,000 fine for Funk's attack on Flair at the Clash of the Champions. Funk refused to apologize for his actions, saying he'd do it again if he could. Crying, Funk said that wrestling is his livelihood and he didn't know what he was going to do. Jim Ross interviewed Jim Cornette, who was backed by the returning Dynamic Dudes. Cornette declined the offer to be their manager, but endorsed them as a future top tag team. He said he'd be their advisor, saying he'd offer them advice in their future matches. Wildfire Tommy Rich battled Dick Murdoch in a hard-hitting, back-and-forth battle. After a bruising war, the bell rang to signal a time-limit draw. Afterwards, both men shook hands in a great display of sportsmanship. Footage aired from Worldwide Wrestling showing the conclusion of a bout between Flying Brian and Eddie Gilbert. Brian hit Gilbert with a springboard clothesline and made the cover, with Gilbert sliding his foot under the bottom rope just in time. The referee didn't see it, declaring Flying Brian the winner. As Flying Brian made his way to the ring for a match, he was confronted by Eddie Gilbert, who challenged him to a rematch next week. Graciously, Brian accepted the challenge. Jim Ross interviewed the Steiner brothers, who were backed by Woman, who said she had nothing to do with the outcome of the match at the Clash of the Champions. Rick said that they'd never lose to the Freebirds again, with Scott saying nothing would come between them. After whispering something to Ross, Rick teased that he had a big question to ask Woman next week. The September 22nd edition of the Power Hour saw Terry Funk host an edition of Funk's Grill. Despite being suspended as a wrestler, he was still allowed to host his show as a mere personality. Funk's guest was Gary Hart, who said that Funk's suspension would be argued all the way to the courtroom. Hart urged Funk to show off his injuries that he received from the World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Funk said, "I will rot in hell before I ever apologize to anyone for what I did. Yes, the intent was there. The only thing that was wrong with it is I didn't complete what I wanted to. I want the World Championship belt." The September 23rd episode of Worldwide Wrestling saw Scott Steiner at the park approaching a limo. Rolling down the window, it was revealed that Robin Green was inside, saying she thought Rick was with Scott. Robin said that she appreciated that Scott admitted to tripping instead of blaming her. She then offered to let Scott wait with her in the limo. As Scott entered, he was attacked by someone, with Woman encouraging the beatdown. With Scott battered on the pavement, Woman lured the mysterious attacker back into the limo. The September 23rd episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Flyin' Brian in action against Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert. After a competitive bout, Brian reversed a roll-up, pinning Gilbert for the win. The September 29th edition of the Power Hour saw the World Television Champion the Great Muta battle Dick Murdoch. Gary Hart stood at ringside in Muta's corner, snapping a towel in the face of Murdoch. After one too many interferences, Murdoch slugged Hart in the face, knocking him off the ring apron. Dick Slater assisted Hart and ultimately bashed Murdoch on the back of the head with a double axe handle. This allowed Muta to pick up a pinfall victory and retain his title. The September 30th edition of Worldwide Wrestling began with Gordon Solie announcing that Terry Funk's suspension has been lifted. World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair paid Funk's fine, thus allowing him to return to active competition. United States Champion Lex Luger made his way to the ring for an enhancement match, only for Flyin' Brian to issue a challenge to the champion. A fight ensued, with Brian tossing Luger around with ease and taking him out with a missile dropkick. Brian then connected with Air Pillman, knocking Luger to the floor. Luger ultimately left the ringside area with the fans on their feet cheering on Flyin' Brian. The World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, cut a passionate promo with Sting by his side. Flair announced that they'd be teaming up to face Terry Funk and the Great Muta in a Thunderdome cage match at Halloween Havoc. Sting showed no fear, saying he was going to electrocute Funk and Muta against the electrified cage. Robin Green cut a promo from a couch, admitting that wasn't her real name. She said, "I am Woman. I'm not a valet, I'm not a manager. What I will be is a woman who will conquer the wrestling world." The Steiner brothers reacted to Woman showing her true colors, with Scott saying he knew she was no good from the start. Rick said that he should have listened to his brother, with Scott urging his attackers to show their faces. They promised revenge and brutality. The October 6th edition of the Power Hour featured a vignette showcasing the construction of the Thunderdome steel cage. Set to AC/DC's Thunderstruck, the cage was welded and battered with sledgehammers by heavily muscular laborers. Terry Funk welcomed Woman to Funk's Grill. Woman said that if she can get to the Steiners, she can get to anyone. The October 13th edition of the Power Hour saw the World Heavyweight Champion Nature Boy Ric Flair battle Dirty Dick Slater, who was accompanied by Gary Hart. It was a hard-hitting, bloody encounter, ultimately seeing Flair steal Hart's jacket to choke both Slater and Hart. Slater was counted out, staggering away up the aisle with Hart, while Flair had his hand raised, victorious. The October 14th episode of World Championship Wrestling began with Terry Funk cutting a spooky promo above a white light. Funk hyped the upcoming Thunderdome cage match at Halloween Havoc, calling it an end to a means. The segment ended with Funk laughing maniacally. Lex Luger interfered in Flyin' Brian Pillman's enhancement match, with the two engaging in a wild brawl. The altercation spilled out of the ring, up the aisle, and through the curtain in an intense scene. The October 20th edition of the Power Hour saw Terry Funk host Funk's Grill. Funk hyped the upcoming Thunderdome cage match at Halloween Havoc, saying he was going to make Ric Flair do the 10,000-watt boogie. Joining him this week was the designated Terminator in the Thunderdome, Ole Anderson. They bickered back and forth, with Anderson saying that Funk is going to need a new profession. Anderson said that Funk isn't going to be able to pull any of his shenanigans in the cage, since the special guest referee was going to be wrestling legend Bruno Sammartino. Accompanied by Gary Hart, the Great Muta defended the World Television Championship against Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert in an exciting matchup. Hart saved Muta's championship, putting his foot on the bottom rope as Gilbert nearly got a 3 count. Gilbert exited the ring and punched Hart in the face, but got caught with a spinning heel kick to the face by Muta upon returning to the ring. Muta picked up a pinfall victory to retain his title. The October 21st edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview the World Heavyweight Champion Nature Boy Ric Flair, Sting, and Ole Anderson. They hyped the Thunderdome cage match, with Sting saying he was ready to beat Terry Funk and the Great Muta to a pulp. A vignette aired, showing Jim Cornette waiting in a hotel suite for Woman. Out came Woman in a revealing dress with champagne, flustering Cornette. Snapping back to reality, Cornette asked Woman why she broke Rick Steiner's heart. Woman said that she needed a way to get into wrestling and she didn't mind breaking Steiner's heart. She revealed that Kevin Sullivan assisted her in hiring the 2 men that attacked Scott Steiner. Jim Ross interviewed Jim Cornette in the Midnight Express, with Stan Lane noticeably irritated. Lane got everything off his chest, accusing Cornette of spending more time with the dynamic dudes instead of helping them secure title shots. It was also revealed that Lane had a personal issue with Johnny Ace, with Cornette not willing to air their dirty laundry. Beautiful Bobby Eaton separated the two, but said that Stan was making sense. The issue was left unresolved, with Cornette visibly angry. The October 27th episode of the Power Hour saw Terry Funk welcome Kevin Sullivan to Funk's Grill. Sullivan gazed at the neon sign and said that after Funk's match at Halloween Havoc, they'd be changing the segment to Sullivan's Corner. He said that it's too bad that a former World Heavyweight Champion is going to let his career end in a way like this. Sullivan continued, shouting at Funk and telling him that Gary Hart is a maggot. The October 28th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw a woman cut a promo from her suite. She revealed that her team was known as Doom, and they were paid to take out Scott Steiner. Woman said that if they want more money, they'll have to take out both Steiners. Gordon Solie questioned Jim Cornette as to why he'd agreed to sign for a match between the Midnight Express and the Dynamic Dudes. Cornette looked puzzled, saying he never signed for such match. Out came the Midnights, with Stan Lane saying that he and Beautiful Bobby Eaton signed for the match. Cornette said that he was sick of being the bad guy and accused Lane of not being able to get over a past love. Out came the Dudes, with Shane Douglas saying they didn't want to cause any trouble. Johnny Ace got in Lane's face and said that it wasn't his fault that Lane's girl left him. Ultimately, they agreed to a match at the next Clash of the Champions. Halloween Havoc took place later that evening on pay-per-view, and saw Jim Cornette lead his team of the Midnight Express and Dr. Death Steve Williams to face the Big Kahuna Sir Oliver Humperdinck's group of the Samoan SWAT team and the Samoan Savage. It was a hard-hitting battle that even saw the managers throw down with each other. Fatu whipped Sweet Stan Lane against the ropes, crashing into Cornette and knocking him off the apron. This allowed Fatu to roll up Lane and pick up a pinfall victory for the Samoans. Backstage, Gordon Solie interviewed Terry Funk and Gary Hart, hyping the Thunderdome cage match. Funk said, "Winston Churchill said never say die. Gary Hart says electrify." The Fabulous Freebirds defended the World Tag Team Championships against the Dynamic Dudes, who were joined by Jim Cornette. While the Dudes showed some serious improvement, they failed to hit Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin with their finisher, the Wipeout. This was thanks to Michael Hayes, who tripped up Ace and caused Douglas to collapse under the weight of Garvin. The Freebirds retained their titles with a pinfall victory, with Cornette furious. The Steiner brothers were in action against women's debuting tag team, the Muscular Masked Men known as Doom. Both Rick and Scott showed no mercy, tossing around Doom with a pair of stereo belly-to-belly suplexes. The beatdown continued, with Woman left angry, pouting around ringside. Doom gained the advantage by using illegal double teaming behind the referee's back. The referee turned around to see Doom nailing Scott with a spike piledriver. Things got out of hand, with all four brawling and the referee losing control. While the referee attended to Scott and a member of Doom brawling outside the ring, Woman climbed onto the apron and put something in the other member of Doom's mask. After a headbutt to Rick, the member of Doom picked up the 3 count to win the match for his team. Lex Luger defended the United States Championship against Flyin' Brian Pillman. Using his speed and agility, Pillman rattled the champion early in the bout. Pillman launched off the top rope with a big splash, with Luger rolling out of the way and Pillman crashing to the mat. This began Luger's advantage, wearing down Pillman with high-impact maneuvers. Still, Pillman battled back and dodged a clothesline to send Luger soaring over the top rope. Back in the ring, Luger attempted a superplex, only for Pillman to shove him to the mat. Pillman jumped off the top rope, rolling up Luger with a sunset flip for a 2 count. After backdropping Luger, Pillman launched off the top, hitting the champion with Air Pillman. Luger kicked out at 2 and dodged a missile dropkick, with Pillman crashing to the mat. Pillman attempted a crossbody, with Luger catching him and dropping him throat first onto the top rope. Luger covered Pillman and picked up a pinfall victory to retain his title. Theodore R. Long led the undefeated Skyscrapers to the ring to face the Road Warriors, who were accompanied by Paul Ellering. It was hard-hitting, with the 4 strongmen clobbering each other mercilessly. Long interfered, bashing Ellering with a heavy metal key, tossing it to Dan Spivey afterwards, who waffled Hawk with it. The bell rang repeatedly to signal a disqualification, with both teams continuing to brawl over the key. Once Hawk and Animal cleared the ring, they were declared the winners. In the main event, Gary Hart's team of Terry Funk and the World Television Champion The Great Muta faced the World Heavyweight Champion Nature Boy Ric Flair and Sting, with Ole Anderson in their corner. The bout took place inside the monstrous Thunderdome electrified cage, with Bruno Sammartino serving as the special guest referee. Per the stipulation, the only way the match could end would be if either Hart or Anderson threw in the towel for their respective team. There was a delay to the start, with a part of the cage catching on fire. Comedically, Muta sprayed mist at the fire in an attempt to extinguish it. Things were wild, with Sting hoisting Funk onto his shoulder and ramming him headfirst into the steel bars of the cage. Flair chopped at the chest of Funk repeatedly until Muta tagged in, who Sting took pleasure in tossing around. The action spilled to the floor, with Muta attacking Sting as he re-entered the ring. Funk bounced Flair against the cage repeatedly and then joined Muta in wearing down Sting. The Stinger bulldogged both Muta and Funk and then attempted to lock in the Scorpion Deathlock on Muta. Funk broke up the submission attempt and rammed Sting's head repeatedly on the top turnbuckle. This allowed Muta to inflict more punishment on Sting. Flair and Funk climbed the cage, with the champion bashing the Funker's head against the cage. Sting chased Muta all the way up the cage, with Muta shocked as he reached the top. All 4 brawled on the cage, grasping onto the bars for dear life while slugging it out. Flair chased after Funk up the cage, with Flair chopping at the Funker as he hung from the bars. The champion swung from a rope, crashing into Funk repeatedly. Funk hung upside down from the cage by his feet, with snot hanging out of his nose. Sting followed Funk up the cage, with the 2 brawling it out at the top. Back in the ring, Flair locked Muta in the figure 4. Sting swung from the rope, crashing against Funk, until the Funker moved and Sting smashed against the cage. Back in the ring, the tides had turned, with Muta locking Flair in a Muta lock. Sting was tied to the cage, with Funk joining Muta in pummeling Flair. Funk hoisted Flair up, with Muta providing extra pressure for a spike pile driver. Anderson untied Sting, allowing him to hit a giant splash off the cage to take out Funk. Muta raced away, climbing to the top of the cage, with Sting chasing after him. Minutes later, all four battled in the ring, with Muta climbing to the top rope. Sting shook the ropes, crotching Muta on the top rope. Flair locked Funk in the figure 4, with Sting leaping off the top rope, landing on Funk with a Stinger Splash. Sting did it again, crashing onto Funk. Meanwhile, Sammartino got in a scuffle with Muta, striking him to the floor. Anderson and Hart battled on the apron, with Anderson knocking the towel out of Hart's hands. Sammartino saw the towel and called for the bell, declaring Flair and Sting the winners. The November 3rd edition of the Power Hour saw Terry Funk host another edition of Funk's Grill. Joining the show via satellite was the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair. Flair and Funk bickered back and forth, hyping their upcoming I Quit match at the Clash of the Champions. Funk said that he doesn't want Flair's belt, but rather his pride. Flair said, "One of us is gonna say I quit, and I'm telling you, it's not gonna be me." He said that he would make Funk crawl across the ring and call him the better man. Funk shook his head side to side, saying, "Never." The November 4th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Woman cut a promo from her suite. She posed the question, what if she managed the World Heavyweight Champion? Woman said that Ric Flair has money, but she has more. In the back, Jim Ross interviewed Terry Funk, who said that if he lost, he'd shake Ric Flair's hand and call him the better man. If Funk wins, Flair would have to shake his hand and call Funk the better man. The November 10th edition of the Power Hour saw Terry Funk invite Gordon Solie onto Funk's Grill. Funk asked Solie who he thought would win the I Quit match, with Solie believing that the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair, would emerge victorious. While Funk disagreed, Solie said that someone's dynasty would come to a close. Funk said, "It won't be mine." The Clash of the Champions 9 New York Knockout took place on November 15th and saw the Fabulous Freebirds defend the World Tag Team Championships against the Road Warriors. Animal and Hawk dominated from the start, with the champions only gaining an advantage after using double-team maneuvers behind the referee's back. Frustrated with the unfair advantage, Hawk shoved referee Tommy Young aside and attacked the Freebirds. This caused a disqualification, with the Freebirds barely escaping with the gold. At ringside, Jim Ross interviewed Terry Funk and Gary Hart, hyping the I Quit match. Hart hyped up Funk, reminding him of his family legacy, telling him not to let Texas down. Funk told Hart he didn't need his help, or anybody else's for that matter, claiming he's the best in the world. Jim Ross interviewed Bill Apter, who handed out the award for the most popular wrestler in the NWA, Sting. Out came Sting, who received a large trophy and thanked the Stingers for their support. Apter then handed out the award for the Wrestler of the Decade, the World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. The champion received his trophy, thanking the fans and hoping for 10 more years of greatness. Woman cut a promo from her suite, saying that there isn't a team in wrestling that can stop Doom. She said that she had a large surprise for Rick Steiner. Jim Cornette interviewed the Steiner brothers, with Scott saying that he's got a name for his unique new move. Rick revealed that he's naming it the Frankensteiner. The Dynamic Dudes battled the Midnight Express, with Jim Cornette sitting at ringside in a neutral corner. Cornette got involved, confiscating a chain from beautiful Bobby Eaton, only to waffle Shane Douglas over the back with his tennis racket. Eaton covered Douglas and scored the pinfall victory, joining Stan Lane and Cornette on the floor in celebration. Theodore R. Long led the Skyscrapers to the ring to face the fan favorites, the Steiner brothers. The crowd went wild, with Rick clotheslining Dan Spivey over the top rope and Scott hitting a Frankensteiner on Sid, followed by a flipping fall-away slam. Doom interfered to cause a disqualification, joining the Skyscrapers in attacking Scott. Woman clobbered Rick with her shoe, which didn't faze him. A giant man saved Woman, getting her out of harm's way just as the Road Warriors raced in to brawl with the Skyscrapers. At ringside, Jim Ross interviewed the Road Warriors, the Steiner brothers, and Paul Ellering, who said they wanted to face the Skyscrapers and Doom. Lex Luger defended the United States Championship against Flying Brian Pillman. With Pillman taking down the champion early on, Luger stalled as long as he could. Luger switched the tempo with high-impact maneuvers, with Pillman still battling back. Pillman leaped off the top rope, taking out Luger with a high cross body, with the referee taken out in the crossfire. With the referee unconscious, nobody could count Pillman's multiple pinfall attempts. Luger grabbed a chair, waffling Pillman over the head with it. The referee awoke to make the 3 count, with Luger retaining his title. After shoving the referee aside, Luger bashed Pillman over the back with the chair. Luger then put Pillman in a torture rack, with Sting racing to the ring for the save. Sting called Luger an arrogant snothead and slapped him across the face. Luger retreated up the aisle, with Sting catching up to him for one more punch to the head. Pre-recorded comments aired from the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair, cutting a promo to hype his upcoming I Quit match. Flair said that both he and Funk were looking to humiliate each other in front of a national audience. He closed by saying, "To be the man, you've gotta beat the man." In the main event, Gary Hart led Terry Funk to the ring to battle the World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, in an I Quit match. Prior to the start, Funk grabbed the microphone, offering Flair the opportunity to walk away. Flair declined, with the two locking up and the champion chopping Funk so hard across the chest that it sent the challenger spilling over the top rope and tumbling over a guardrail. The champion continued lighting up the chest of Funk with vicious chops on the floor. Back in the ring, Funk stuck his thumb in Flair's eye to gain the advantage, stomping on the champion as he hung off the apron. They traded thunderous chops in the middle of the ring until Funk tossed Flair to the floor. Funk rammed Flair head first onto a steel guardrail, following it up with multiple punches to the face. Approaching Flair with the microphone, Funk asked Flair if he wanted to quit. The champion responded by chopping Funk away. Back in the ring, Funk stood on the second rope, pounding on Flair in the corner and asking if he quit, while also calling him an egg-sucking dog. Flair refused, atomic dropping Funk to escape from the corner. The action spilled to the floor, with Flair bouncing Funk off multiple guardrails with stiff chops to the chest. Back in the ring, Flair grabbed the microphone, shoving it in Funk's face and asking if he quit. Hart provided a distraction, diverting Flair's attention and allowing Funk to hit from behind. In the middle of the ring, Funk pounded on Flair, asking him if he remembers what happened to his neck and suggesting he should quit. Funk set Flair up for a piledriver, yelling at referee Tommy Young to ask the champion if he quits. With Flair refusing to quit, Funk spiked him with a piledriver. Still, Flair wouldn't quit. A frustrated Funk tossed Flair to the floor, hitting a piledriver on the champion head first onto the concrete. On commentary, Gordon Solie said, "We may be seeing the end of a dynasty right here." Funk bounced the microphone off Flair's head, with Jim Ross on commentary asking how the Funker could have so little compassion. Flipping the timekeeper's table, Funk made the mistake of taking his eyes off the champion. Flair snuck up behind Funk, bashing his head against the table. The champion chopped at Funk and slid him across the table, face first onto a guardrail. Hart tried to check on Funk, with Flair tossing him aside. Flair crouched Funk onto a guardrail, chopping him across the chest with tremendous force. Back in the ring, Flair dropped a knee onto the forehead of Funk and then wore down his legs. Funk tried to escape, hobbling up the aisle until Flair tackled him to the ground and then carried him back to ringside. Flair suplexed Funk back into the ring, suplexing back out onto the apron moments later. The champion struck Funk with some chops to the chest to knock him down to the mat. Flair locked in the figure 4, with Tommy Young shoving the microphone in the face of an agonizing Funk. The Funker screamed "never" while crying in pain. He then began saying, "My leg, it's breaking." With no other option, Funk said, "Yes, I quit." The referee raised Flair's arm in victory as a furious Hart threw his jacket down and screamed at Funk. Despite the lambasting from Hart, Funk was true to his word, shaking the hand of Flair. Hart cheap-shotted Funk, knocking him to the mat. Flair punched Hart in the face repeatedly until the Great Muta and the Dragon Master raced to the scene. Muta and Dragon Master assaulted Flair, with Hart continuing to batter Funk. Sting raced to the ring to clean house and locked the Dragon Master in the Scorpion Deathlock, just as Flair placed Muta in the figure 4. Lex Luger raced in, waffling Sting across the back with a steel chair. Flair attacked Luger, with Muta ambushing the champion. It became a complete assault on Flair, Funk, and Sting, who were left battered in the middle of the ring. Luger marched up the aisle, smashing the trophies of Flair and Sting with a steel chair. The November 18th edition of the main event saw Sting cut a promo on Lex Luger, saying, "The difference between me and a trophy is, I hit back." The United States Champion Lex Luger cut a rebuttal promo, calling himself the King of the Hill, who can't be touched. Luger said that he wants the world title, and he doesn't care how he has to do it. Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express cut a promo, with Cornette blaming the fans for not getting them title opportunities. Cornette said that they plotted against the Dynamic Dudes before they could make a bigger name for themselves. Sweet Stan Lane reminisced about having to kiss the faces of the fans, insulting them. Cornette closed by saying that the real Midnight Express is back. The November 18th episode of Worldwide Wrestling saw the World Tag Team Champions, the Fabulous Freebirds, battle the team of Flyin' Brian Pillman and the Z-Man Tom Zink. Both Pillman and Zink showed signs of chemistry until the champions laid a beating on the Z-Man and kept him out of his corner. Zink finally made the tag, with Pillman flying in to clean house. Pillman climbed to the top rope, with Jimmy Garvin shaking the ropes to send Flyin' Brian tumbling to the floor. The Freebirds nailed Zink with a double spine buster, with the referee calling for the bell. Pillman sprung off the ropes, taking out the Freebirds with Air Pillman to send them retreating. The November 18th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw Woman cut a promo backstage, backed by Doom. Woman had some words for Rick Steiner, saying, "First I took your heart, next I'm going to take your soul." Gary Hart introduced the returning Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer, who destroyed his opponent and won an enhancement match after a big splash off the top rope. The Fabulous Freebirds defended the World Tag Team Championships against the Steiner Brothers. As things broke down, the referee's attention became diverted, allowing Jimmy Garvin to jump off the top rope in an attempt to break a pinfall. Rick Steiner moved, with Garvin landing on his partner, Michael Hayes. Rick covered Garvin, scoring the pinfall victory. The Steiner brothers were crowned the new World Tag Team Champions. Members of the locker room made their way to the ring to congratulate the new champions. The November 25th episode of Worldwide Wrestling saw Lex Luger defend the United States Championship against Flyin' Brian Pillman. It didn't take long for Luger to grow frustrated with Pillman, tying him in a tree of woe. Luger grabbed a steel chair, preparing to inflict serious damage until Sting raced to the ring and tackled him to the mat. After a flurry of punches, Sting connected on Luger with a Stinger Splash and then took the fight to the floor. With the champion scurrying away, Sting made his way back to the ring to raise the arm of Pillman. The November 25th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview his new co-host, Kevin Sullivan. Jim Cornette led the Midnight Express to the ring, who were in their street clothes and didn't look ready to compete for their enhancement match. Sweet Stan Lane said that they were too good for their opponents, with referee Nick Patrick counting them out. After shaking hands with their opponents, the Midnights attacked. Jim Ross interviewed Cornette and the Midnights, saying they'd grant the Dynamic Dudes one more match. Cornette also challenged the World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, to put the gold on the line against Beautiful Bobby Eaton. Jim Ross interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair, about his upcoming match against the World Television Champion, the Great Muta. Flair praised Muta's skills and accomplishments, but said he'd knock his teeth down his throat. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair defended the World Heavyweight Championship against the World Television Champion, the Great Muta. The early part of the match saw Muta wear down Flair, taking the fight to the mat and attempting to make the champion submit. A burst of adrenaline shifted the momentum, with the Nature Boy fighting back. Just as Flair locked Muta in the figure 4, the Dragon Master ran in to cause a disqualification. Flair knocked the Dragon Master to the floor and locked him in the figure 4. Muta walked up to Flair and sprayed red mist directly into his eyes. Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer joined in on attacking Flair, hitting him with a big splash off the top rope. Muta moonsaulted off the top rope onto Flair, with Sawyer making a 3 count. While the fans chanted "We want Sting," Flair agonized on the mat, with the show coming to a close. The December 1st episode of the Power Hour saw the Steiner brothers defend the World Tag Team Championships against women's duo known as Doom. Things broke down, and Woman made her way into the ring with a high heel in hand. Rick Steiner noticed her and shifted his attention, with Nitron entering the ring to protect Woman and carry her away to safety. One half of Doom waffled Rick over the head with a steel chair, which brought a smile to his face. The brawling continued, with the other half of Doom pile-driving Scott onto a steel chair. The December 2nd edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Ross interview the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair, who cut a promo on the J-Tex Corporation. Flair told Gary Hart that he had a big surprise for him next week and told him to bring his whole army. United States Champion Lex Luger won an enhancement match, defeating his opponent with a torture rack. Luger kept the hold in after the bell, which brought out Sting. It was a trap, with Luger throwing his opponent down to attack Sting as he entered the ring. Sting fought back, getting the better of Luger, causing an exasperated champion to retreat to the back. Jim Cornette led the Midnight Express to the ring for action against the Dynamic Dudes, kicking off their brawl on the floor. With the referee distracted, Beautiful Bobby Eaton waffled Shane Douglas over the back with a steel chair on the floor. Cornette added insult to injury, slapping Douglas across the face. Johnny Ace punched Cornette in the face, knocking him off the apron. Sweet Stan Lane used Cornette's tennis racket, bashing Ace across the back with it to cause an echoing thud and a disqualification. The December 9th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Cornette put up $5,000 to any team that could last 5 minutes in the ring with the Midnight Express. After defeating the first 2 teams easily, the Midnights were attacked by a masked team that was clearly the Dynamic Dudes. In short order, the masked team picked up the victory, winning the money and unmasking to reveal that they were in fact the Dudes. In the ring, Jim Ross interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair, who invited Gary Hart to the ring to see his surprise firsthand. Out came Hart, who introduced his J-Tex army of the Great Muta, the Dragon Master, and Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer. This didn't bother Flair, who charged at Muta with right hands. Racing into the ring to aid Flair was Ole Anderson, and the big surprise, the returning Enforcer Arn Anderson. The Andersons joined Flair in cleaning house. At ringside, Jim Ross interviewed Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Ole Anderson, with the fans cheering them on. A confident Flair said, "The wrestling world needs to be shaken up." Ole said that the Wrecking Crew was back in business to serve some law and order. Arn said, Do not jump a dog in his own backyard, and don't mess with his family. He addressed Gary Hart and his army, saying, "Our backyard is the NWA. It started here, and by God it's gonna finish here. A la carte, the Four Horsemen." A match took place between Wildfire Tommy Rich and Mike Rotunda, with a scary incident taking place involving referee Tommy Young. As the intensity reached its peak, Young tried to maintain order by breaking up the action. In a freak accident, Rich shoved Young in such a way that Young flew backwards, bounced off the ropes, and broke his neck. The match continued with Young attended to on the ring apron. This would be the end of Tommy Young's full-time career as a referee. Starrcade Future Shock took place on December 13th, live on pay-per-view from the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia. The show featured 2 Iron Man round-robin tournaments, one for a singles title and one for a tag team title. If a wrestler or team wins a match by pinfall or submission, they earn 20 points, 15 points for a countout, and 10 points if you win by disqualification. Only 5 points would be given if the match went to a draw, and a loss earns you 0 points. Competing in the singles portion was the World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, the World Television Champion, the Great Muta, the United States Champion, Lex Luger, and Sting. In the tag team portion, we saw the World Tag Team Champions, the Steiner Brothers, the Road Warriors, the Samoan SWAT Team, and Doom. The opening match saw Woman and Nitron lead Doom to the ring to battle the World Tag Team Champions, the Steiner Brothers. Nitron got involved, clobbering Scott Steiner repeatedly with right hands to the face. Scott persevered and tagged in Rick, who took out Doom with Steiner lines until Nitron tripped him up. Rick rolled to the floor and took out Nitron with a stiff Steiner line. Both teams brawled to the floor, with the referee beginning his count. At 9, Rick rolled into the ring to win the match and score the Steiners 15 points. Kicking off the singles portion of the tournament, Sting battled the United States Champion, Lex Luger. Sting battered Luger around ringside, with the total package gaining the advantage in the ring and scrambling for a pinfall. With 2 minutes remaining in the 15-minute time limit, Sting gained his second wind. They battled on the apron, tumbling back into the ring with Luger falling on top of Sting. Despite being tangled in the ropes, the referee still made the 3 count to give Luger the victory and 20 points. The Road Warriors took on Doom in a hard-hitting battle that saw Hawk hit a clothesline off the top rope, with Animal scoring the pinfall victory to earn the LOD 20 points. World Heavyweight Champion Nature Boy Ric Flair, with Arn and Ole Anderson in his corner, took on the World Television Champion the Great Muta, who had Gary Hart in his corner. It didn't take long for Flair to lock Muta in a figure 4, with Hart jumping on the apron to distract the referee. The Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer and the Dragon Master raced to the ring, with the Andersons fending them off. Flair broke his hold, putting his hands on Hart, which allowed Muta to ambush the champion. Muta moonsaulted off the top rope, with Flair providing a harsh landing by lifting his knees. Flair rolled up Muta with a small package for the 3 count, earning 20 points and ending Muda's undefeated streak. The World Tag Team Champions, the Steiner Brothers, battled the Road Warriors in a hard-fought and hard-hitting bout. Scott Steiner attempted a belly-to-belly suplex on Hawk off the second rope, with Hawk landing hard on his face. Things broke down, with all four battling in the ring. The Road Warriors hit Scott with a modified Doomsday device, with Animal pinning Scott. With Animal's shoulders also down, Scott lifted his up, with the referee counting 3 to give the Steiners 20 more points. Up next, Gary Hart led the World Television Champion, the Great Muta, to the ring to battle Sting. While Sting managed to dodge a moonsault, he ate a spinning heel kick from Muta. Just as Muta climbed to the top rope, Sting jumped high with a dropkick, crotching Muta on the top turnbuckle. Sting hit a superplex off the top rope, picking up a pinfall victory to earn 20 points. Sir Oliver Humperdinck's team of the Samoan SWAT team faced women's tandem known as Doom. Both Fatu and a member of Doom collided heads, with Humperdinck pushing his man forward. Fatu landed on top of his opponent and picked up a pinfall victory, with the SST earning 20 points. Standing with Nitron, Woman stood with her arms crossed, irritated. World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair faced the United States Champion Lex Luger. It was a back-and-forth, hard-hitting encounter that came down to the wire. With 30 seconds remaining, Flair locked Luger in the figure 4. Despite the total package screaming in pain, he never gave up, rendering the match a draw. This meant that both Flair and Luger earned 5 points. The Steiner brothers were in action next, taking on the Samoan SWAT team. Exhaustion had set in, and the champions found themselves on the receiving end of a beating at the hands of the SST. With 1 minute remaining, Rick Steiner made the tag. Unfortunately, the referee didn't see it and ended up disqualifying Rick, giving the Samoan SWAT team the victory and 10 points. United States Champion Lex Luger was in action against the World Television Champion, the Great Muta. Luger's left ankle became a target, with Muta attacking it and wearing down the total package. With 3 minutes remaining, Luger shifted the momentum. As the clock ticked down, Luger tried to lift Muta up for a torture rack. Luger's ankle gave out, and Muta blew green mist in his eyes to cause a disqualification. This earned Luger another 10 points, finishing the tournament with 35 points. In the final tag team match, the Samoan SWAT team battled the Road Warriors. The match didn't last long, and saw Hawk hit Fatu with a clothesline off the top rope to pick up a pinfall victory. This gave the Road Warriors 20 points, finishing the tournament with 40 points to win the Iron Man tournament. In the final of the singles tournament, Sting battled the World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. They wore each other down in the first 5 minutes until Flair rocked Sting with thunderous chops to the chest. Flair took the fight to the floor, whipping Sting against a steel guardrail. Back in the ring, Flair attempted multiple pinfalls, with Sting kicking out and the Nature Boy accusing the referee of counting slow. Sting shook off Flair's chops and stalked him around ringside. Back in the ring, Sting hit a Stinger Splash and attempted a Scorpion Deathlock, with Flair scurrying for the bottom rope. Moments later, Flair locked Sting in a figure 4, with the Stinger quick to grasp the bottom rope. 2 minutes remained as Flair kicked away at the knees of Sting. 1 minute remained and both men scurried for a pinfall. Flair kicked at the injured legs of Sting and attempted another figure 4. Instead, Sting rolled up Flair in a small package and picked up the victory. Sting earned another 20 points to win the tournament. As fireworks burst above the ring, Flair and the Andersons inched towards Sting. In a moment of class, Flair raised the arm of Sting, with the Andersons following suit. On the stage, Gordon Solie interviewed the Road Warriors, with Hawk saying that they lived up to their theme song, winning the Iron Man tournament. As Animal cut his victory speech, the credits began rolling to close out the broadcast. The December 16th episode of World Championship Wrestling saw the World Tag Team Champions, the Steiner Brothers, face Rick Fargo and the debuting Cactus Jack Manson. Despite taking an incredible beating, Cactus showed signs of promise, beginning what would be a legendary career in mainstream wrestling. The Steiners were victorious, with Scott pinning Fargo after a Frankensteiner. Following the match, Cactus attacked Fargo and tossed him to the floor. Cactus ran off the apron, dropping a big elbow onto Fargo on the concrete floor. After winning an enhancement match, Arn and Ole Anderson joined Jim Ross for an interview. Arn addressed the bond that he has with Ole and the World Heavyweight Champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair. He cut a promo saying, "Family is still family. We may smack each other, but Sawyer, Hart, Muta, Dragon Master, you wanna smack us? You've got to pay the fiddler." He threw up 4 fingers, with Flair and Ole on each side, doing the same. At ringside, Jim Ross interviewed the United States Champion Lex Luger, who called himself the premier athlete in all of wrestling. Luger said that Ric Flair shouldn't delay the inevitable, and instead should relinquish the World Heavyweight Championship to him. Out came Flair, calling Luger the greatest athlete in the sport, but to be the man, you've gotta beat the man. The December 23rd edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Jim Cornette lead the Midnight Express to the ring to face Bobby and Jackie Fulton, the new Fantastics. After a fast-paced, exciting encounter, it was the teamwork of the Midnights shining brighter to score a pinfall victory. Jim Ross interviewed the World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, and Arn and Ole, the Andersons. They said that the 4 horsemen were back, with Arn saying he was here to stay. In the main event, Lex Luger defended the United States Championship against Sting. A frustrated champion had a difficult time keeping the Stinger down, even introducing a chair out of desperation. Sting set Luger up for a Stinger Splash, with the total package holding up a chair to provide a harsh landing. Just as Luger prepared to inflict more damage, World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair raced to the scene. Flair and Luger brawled until Gary Hart's J-Tex Corporation raced in to provide backup for the total package. The Andersons ran in, with complete pandemonium ensuing. The December 30th edition of World Championship Wrestling saw Cactus Jack Manson team with enhancement talent Ned Brady to face Wildfire Tommy Rich and Ranger Ross. Cactus was unsuccessful in his efforts and again took out his anger on his partner, following the loss. Just as he did last week, Cactus ran off the apron, dropping a brutal elbow onto his opponent on the concrete floor. Sting was in action against the Dragon Master, who had Gary Hart and the Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer in his corner. It took a simple inside cradle for Sting to pick up the victory, causing Sawyer to become irate at ringside. Sensing danger, the Andersons raced to the scene and backed the man called Sting. Gary Hart called his men away, retreating up the aisle. Would the unlikely alliance of Sting and the Horsemen continue into the new year? Find out next time on Squared Circle History, as we continue our WCW arc and cover World Championship Wrestling in 1990. If you'd like to support the show, please subscribe to the channel and give a like to this episode. Check out our Squared Circle History and Pro Wrestling Rushmore merchandise on Pro Wrestling Tees, and give us a follow on Instagram at squared.circle.history. Thank you for tuning in, and keep dropping elbows.